steps over, does not show compassion. And then a Samaritan man comes. And the Samaritan has mercy on that person, spends their own money, their own time, their own talent, takes the beaten Jewish man to an inn and has that person taken care of. And that sounds really neat. That sounds awesome. And it's even better when you know the historical context, because Jews and Samaritans hated each other. And he still served that man. So that is who our neighbor is. Politically, I see the world very different from you. But we still have value in our differences, and I would go back to that. We should be leaning into each other. Representative Finke, you and I see the world very differently, and that's okay, but you're still my neighbor. And what guides me is my faith in Jesus Christ, nothing else. My faith tells me, Representative Finke, that I need to serve you and every other member across this body on both sides. That I am guided by my faith, that I have to serve you. That doesn't come from a book. I mean, it does, but it comes from my faith and my trust in Jesus. And that is excluded, my faith is excluded in the underlying bill. That is why I support the Dameth Amendment. All means all. Regardless of how you look at the world, all means all. Thank you. Support the Dameth Amendment.
The member from Carleton, Representative Dotseth.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, we keep hearing a lot about all means all. This means each and every one of us in this room are equal. All means all. I couldn't say any better than the way you spoke today, Representative Bakerberg. Excellent. Will the author of the bill yield to a question?
She will yield. Representative Dotseth. Representative Dotseth, you have the floor. Sorry.
Thank you. Representative Hurt, will you yield to a question?
She will yield. Representative Dotseth.
Can you give me the definition of all?
Representative Herr.
Representative Dotseth, I think that Webster does a better job of doing that, and I think we can all look that up.
I know there are some pockets of the floor where it's hard to hear, so the less talking and shuffling of papers there is, the easier it is for members in the harder pockets to hear. And also, everything goes through the presiding officer so that there aren't debates between members, but through the presiding officer. Representative Dotseth.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Definition of all: a person who is equal standing with another in a group. Equal. Leader Damas, this is an excellent amendment. Religion, I'd say that's equal to all. Will the author of the bill yield to another question?
She will yield. Representative Dotseth.
Thank you. Representative Herr, would you agree that religion would be included in all?
Representative Herr.
Speaker Horman, thank you, and Representative Dotseth. And I do, and that's why the religion hasn't been removed. So how we write language here is that if something is getting removed, it gets struck out. If you see in this language, nothing has been struck out. And so I would encourage my friends across the aisle to look, and it sounds like Representative Nash has a copy of our Constitution, but the preamble very clearly states that religion is a really important part of our state and how we operate. And also in Article 1, Section 16, religion is still protected in there in Article 1, Section 17. None of that is getting struck out. So religion is still in there, and religion still receives the highest level of scrutiny and protection. And again, like Representative Finke says, is it receives higher protection in the state of Minnesota than our U.S. Constitution provides. So I hope that answered your question.
Representative Dotseth.
Thank you, Representative. I appreciate your feedback on that. What I'm hearing is that religion wouldn't be in opposition, so I would think that that'd be a support for the amendment. I sense that all means all. Equal rights includes everyone. I think you'll find I'm not a large speaker. I'll get up and just share my opinion and sit back down. But remember, all means all. And I thank you for support of this amendment.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Curran.
Thank you, Speaker. I wanted to sort of level set a little bit and just acknowledge that our original Constitution included very strong religious protections for everyone. I mean, that's the foundation of, when settlers came and decided how this country should be, what the foundation should be. And so that came from good reason, because people were controlled by religion in the country of origin from the folks that came here. And we didn't want that to happen anymore, and we still don't want that to happen. So every person in America, based on those foundations, has the fundamental right to participate in religion, in any religion they choose, or no religion at all. That's in our federal Constitution. It has always been in our Constitution. What has not been in our Constitution are the protections that the underlying bill seeks to protect today. Every Minnesotan has a status in all of the characteristics listed in the underlying bill. Over history, these characteristics of individuals have been consistently attacked without further constitutional protections. And this doesn't just mean that we are protecting one race over another. It simply states race. This means that you could not be discriminated against for being white, or for being black, or for being brown, or for being Asian, or whatever your race may be. This is not one group over another. We all have a status in every single characteristic listed in the underlying bill. This also, I will say again, it protects sexual orientation in the underlying language. That is true. It doesn't say that you can't discriminate against queer people. Every single person in this room and in the state of Minnesota has some element of sexual orientation. Every single person in the state of Minnesota has a gender identity. We are not saying that any single one of those is superior. We are saying that whichever characteristic that you have, whatever your identity is, you cannot be discriminated against for those characteristics. So the A19 erases the acknowledgement that over history, characteristics of people have been looked upon as bad, or people have been treated as less than. And again, this goes back to, we all know if you were Irish and you came over hundreds of years ago, you were not treated well because of your country of origin. The same happened with Italians. The same happened with Jews. We all know that this continued to happen throughout history. And what this constitutional amendment, the base language says, is that we cannot allow that here in our state of Minnesota. And our Constitution already fully protects religion. This is a separate issue that has failed to be acknowledged for hundreds of years. And so the underlying bill corrects that mistake and says, no, you cannot continue to pick and choose of these characteristics, which one you like and which one you don't. And these are the underrepresented communities that have consistently been ways for people to be discriminated upon. So we have to vote no on this amendment to ensure that none of these groups are discriminated against ever again.
The member from Anoka, Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I look at this bill and I'm confused. I'm getting two mixed messages here about what the proposed constitutional amendment does. And so I'm probably going to ask Representative Niska to yield here eventually, but I do want to bring up this issue of the fact that age is not included in this. And we're all getting older, our population is getting older, and this is one of the most common human rights violations that's happening across our nation. And there are quite a few cases in our own state every year that are filed due to age discrimination. And so I think it's, in addition to the other things that aren't listed out here in this, proposed constitutional amendment. That is one of them, in addition to, well, for one, we don't have the, well, we'll get to that later, but I want to focus on the age thing for just 1 minute. And I'm confused by why, again, that's not added, because it is happening a lot. People are being discriminated in the workplace due to their age. And as a person that's not, well, we're not, all of us are not getting any younger, but I'm not getting any younger and moving closer and closer to that retirement age, and it gives me great pause. And the other thing that gives me great pause is, you know, the lack of rights that an older person may have when we have bills that have been introduced by the Democrat Party this year that have to do with assisted suicide. And will there come a time when, because it's not listed here, that the elderly are not going to have a right in that regard? So this gives me a lot of concern, in addition to the other things that aren't listed here. But I'm wondering if Representative Niska would yield for a question.
He will yield. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Niska, Representative Curran just laid out that she believes that what this is doing is not dismissing or diminishing constitutional rights that are already there and protected, such as age and religion. Do you agree with the statements that she was making from a constitutional standpoint?
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Scott, for that question. So I think it's important to especially when we're talking about religion, that we think about the way that that Minnesota jurisprudence in particular protects religion, and the ways that those protections can be overcome by the state. So it is true that Minnesota actually was one of the first states to reject a more limiting interpretation of the Free Exercise Clause by the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Supreme Court, in a case called Employment Division versus Smith, actually limited free exercise rights in a way that the Minnesota Supreme Court then rejected, and said that in Minnesota we have we apply a strict scrutiny test instead to free exercise of religion claims. But Minnesota case law does overcome that with the compelling state interest when the state is doing certain things, especially in particular to further its interest in eliminating discrimination. And so there is grave concern among the faith community that by calling out specific things and by specifically saying the state will not discriminate in purpose or effect based on certain, certain characteristics or certain group identities that are specifically called out, and maybe even things like gender expression or things like that may create a conflict with certain faith perspectives. That actually will create a situation in which the state's interest in overcoming or forcing or compelling religious organizations or faith communities to bow to whatever those words mean and whatever that view is that's being then expressed in the Minnesota Constitution, that would in fact diminish the rights that are provided there. And I think, again, it's important when the state or when the courts do interpret some of the very vague and flexible language in this Equal Rights Amendment, that they're going to look at the legislative history and what these terms meant, and the fact that the author of the amendment here in the House has said things like only certain categories are marginalized and need to be particularly called out. I think that does create a situation in which other rights are going to be diminished as a result in the future cases. But we're going to have to pass this, I guess, to see what's in it. I mean, I think that's one thing that I heard in the Rules Committee, and so it creates a lot of new uncertainty in the law going forward in Minnesota.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Niska. I really appreciate those words. And one of the things that concerns me is by virtue of removing things like age or religion, by virtue of them not appearing here in this special list that you've made, is that it's going to be all-out lawsuit heyday on religious institutions just to test this new law. And then, by virtue of that, in my opinion, they are going to be diminished. As the bill's author said before, that even though our Constitution says one thing, it's still not good enough, then I think that the tables are going to be turned on religious institutions, and it's going to end up that they should have appeared on this list. In fact, I think maybe you have some of the same concerns because we're going to have a Wolgamott amendment later adding religion back in. So I'm getting mixed signals, and I know you all have individual votes over there, and some of you may want to vote differently on the Wolgamott amendment. But it seems like there's mixed signals. On the one hand, you don't want to include religion, and on the other hand, you do. So there must be some concern that lawsuits are going to ensue and religious institutions are going to be targeted because of what's not in the existing bill. Members, please support the Dameth Amendment. It does what needs to be done. Thank you.
The member from Traverse, Representative Backer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. You know, this is one of those common sense amendments, and I really appreciate it because it states freedom from discrimination. I think all of us, when we are sworn in, that is something that's important to all of us. Because myself, I love fighting for the underdog. That's who I have been all my life. And a couple concerns about why I like this amendment, so it makes this is a better bill, is this bill as it stands right now leaves out age. It does not include that in the special list or the so-called list. Also, it does not specifically talk about protecting women and girls who want to participate in sports. And it also leaves out religion, and we've heard about that. You know, we really need a bill that protects everyone, not just a certain group. And so this amendment makes sense. It's good. I would ask for a green vote. Thank you, members.
The member from Douglas, Representative Franson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, in the Christian faith, the Bible says that there are two genders, male and female. And in his image, they made him, or he made them, male and female. So I have a question. If the bill author, Representative Herr, would yield to a question.
Representative Herr will yield.
Representative Herr, a couple days ago in California, a California school district settled a $360,000 lawsuit after it fired a teacher because the teacher refused to follow district policy, which included using a student's preferred pronouns. Now, my question comes back to the Equal Rights Amendment, or Equal Rights for Some, but not all, amendment on gender ideology. So if it's the Christians, an individual practices the Christian faith, and in that belief system, two genders, doesn't believe in gender ideology or that gender is a moving construct, and doesn't want to live a lie by going along with gender ideology or the use of pronouns. Under the underlying bill, your bill, would that be discrimination for not using preferred pronouns? Or would that be protected under religion?
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Representative Long, please state your point of order.
Masons 101, the question was to the underlying bill and not to the amendment A19. We should stick to the amendment debate.
Representative Franson, I have to say I didn't hear the question because I was distracted by former State Representative Steve Simon in the gallery. We welcome him back to the chamber. Apparently, we're going to see all the former members today. Representative Franson, so I didn't hear what you said, but if you could direct your debate to the amendment, that'd be fantastic. Representative Franson.
I will rephrase my question. I won't go through the entire Christian faith again. Under the amendment that Representative Dameth has offered here, if this amendment is not adopted, would Christians still be able to practice their faith system and not have to go along with gender ideology and the use of pronouns?
Representative Herr.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Franson, for that question. Nothing changes about religion with this bill or with this amendment, with this bill.
Representative Franson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, members, Representative Herr, I don't find that as an answer. In this body alone, we do get chastised if we are not using correct pronouns, or if we believe a man is not a woman. We get chastised and told to be respectful on that, which to some may be going along with a lie. So again, I ask you, Representative Herr, if this amendment is not adopted, are individuals free to believe that there's still two genders, and are they able to not be forced to use pronouns?
Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Franson, I'm just going to repeat my answer again because nothing in this bill changes religion, changes how you might want to operate. I mean, I think it's a common courtesy to want to be called our names correctly or our pronouns. If you don't do it, the law doesn't tell you. You have to. That's why you can not do it here and still be here. So nothing changes about how you choose to practice, how you choose to be. Nothing changes about religion with the passage of the ERA. And let me remind people that what we are doing today is putting it to the voters of Minnesota to decide if these are the values that they care about. It's not me changing it. I know there's been references to the author doing specifically this or that, and the truth is that I do nothing. This is really to be put in front of Minnesotans to decide if these are the values that they want to have in our state constitution. Again, nothing changes about religion with the ERA.
Representative Franson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, members, I'm still confused because even in this body, we are scolded. Yes, we are still allowed to be a lawmaker because people elect us as their voice. But we have had members literally melt down when they feel they're not respected in the gender ideology. So I'm still confused. I really don't understand why we simply just cannot adopt the amendment, which in my opinion, would clear things up. But I guess we will have more to say as this debate continues. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just to kind of recenter the debate, the Dameth Amendment, the way that the language would read after assuming it was adopted is it would say all persons shall be guaranteed equal rights and freedom from discrimination. Simple. So if you want all people, all persons to be guaranteed equal rights and freedom from discrimination, the correct vote is green. Now, what we've been told here in this chamber today is that we need to go further than that. We need to delineate all these separate categories in order to ensure that they aren't specially discriminated against, because apparently the simple statement that all persons shall be guaranteed equal rights and freedom from discrimination is somehow unclear or undefinitive, doesn't cover everyone. All doesn't mean all. We were told we need to look up in the dictionary what the word all means. I feel like I'm listening to Bill Clinton say it depends on what the definition of is again. But this is really simple. I do appreciate the deflection to Article 1, Section 16 of the Constitution and representing that as religion is already protected, so don't you worry about it. Don't you worry your pretty little head. Religion is already protected. But what the underlying bill will do is eviscerate Article 1, Section 16. That's what it's going to do. One of the clauses in there, nor shall any control of or interference with the rights of conscience be permitted. Rights of conscience. We're talking about things like freedom of belief, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, rights of conscience. Earlier, we heard a couple of interesting quotes from a member from the majority. Every person has a degree of sexual orientation, was one of the statements. Another one was, every person has a gender identity. Those are worldview statements that under Article 1, Section 16, I am free to disagree with. If the underlying amendment, the underlying bill, is passed by this body and the other body and ratified and becomes part of the Constitution of the state of Minnesota, the Constitution will be at war with itself, because you're going to be imposing that worldview and those worldview statements into the Constitution of the state of Minnesota. And so how do you resolve that conflict that you've just created? My right, everyone's right in here, everyone's right in the state of Minnesota to not have control or interference with our conscience, our rights of conscience. How is that going to resolve within the same document enshrining ideas that millions of Minnesotans fundamentally disagree with, and that our faith community fundamentally disagrees with? Don't worry your pretty little head. I guess if I was born yesterday, maybe I could take you at your word, but I've been sitting here for the last 2 years. I watched in the Judiciary Committee hearing on the Human Rights Act as members of our faith community from every religion were denigrated, implied to be bigots, told that their beliefs were wrong, that they were preaching hate. And that didn't just happen. It's bad enough that it happened here. It went on to happen on social media. It was stated in that same committee hearing by one of your members that we're not going to just give you back your religious liberty. We're not going to just give it back to you. We're not going to do that. Which raises interesting questions about why we fixed that language recently. But I think the underlying bill here answers those questions. Because again, you are going to establish in the Constitution of the state of Minnesota worldview statements that are in contrast with and in conflict with the fundamental beliefs, the deeply held religious beliefs of millions of Minnesotans. If the intent here is actually to ensure that all persons are guaranteed equal rights, then the correct vote on the Dameth Amendment is green. If that's not the intention, then you'll go red.
I recognize the member from Sherburne, Representative Lawrence.
Madam Speaker, members, good morning, good afternoon at this point in time, and thank you. I think as I've sat here, listened to some of the testimony, I think it's essentially visit on one small little word just a bit further. The word all. Every, total, whole, all, it means everything. It means everyone. All is extremely inclusive. It includes all people, all humans, all citizens of the state of Minnesota. When that word is used, it accomplishes everything. It's getting at every factor that each one of us on both sides of the aisle are after. It includes every one of us, every one of our residents, every one of our citizens, every one of our students. It includes every single one of us, all the people, all humans, all citizens. It's everyone. And I'm sure this has happened to you, but anytime I make a list, I forget things. My wife gets to the grocery store, she makes a list to go to the grocery store. I go get something, she calls, I forgot such and such, right? And she thought it was all inclusive, but it never is. When I get a parts list and I have to go to get parts for a tractor or my automobile or something, it seems like I forget things to add to that list. I don't remember right away. Here it is the same thing. As long as I've been in government and involved in politics and decision making, we forget things. And this is another one. Whenever we make a list like this, somebody will be excluded. A part of our society is going to be excluded when we try to make a list like this. That's why it's so important we stick with words that encompass everyone. All does. All does that. Even today, as we've sat in discussion, whether you agree with the discussion or not, it doesn't matter, but several times a part of this list has been brought up as being missed. Representative Bakeberg brought up age, references grandmother. We've heard several people reference religious beliefs. The elderly, right? I mean, there's parts that have already been brought up today as we discuss that bill. It says, hey, when we say all and we make this list, we're still missing parts of this list. I would encourage us as a body to look at this amendment, to really evaluate this amendment, to think back in our own history when we've tried to make a list on our own and go with the word that means everyone, whole, total, complete. Use the word all. And let's stop making a list of individuals and specializing a part of something that's so important as our state's constitution. It affects every one of us in the state of Minnesota. It's very careful how we draft this and put it on the ballot to be voted on. Please look at this amendment, adopt the amendment today, and focus on all the people of the state of Minnesota, not a list of people of Minnesota. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Wright, Representative McDonald.
Madam Speaker, one of my favorite quotes here on the Capitol grounds, and this has to do with the amendment that I support, is from Hewitt H. Humphrey, and it really is a testament to who we are as a nation and as a people of Minnesota. And you've heard it before, and I'm going to quote it again because then I want to tie it in to Representative Dameth's amendment. The moral test of government is how that government treats those who are in the dawn of life, the children, those who are in the twilight of their life, the elderly, and those who are in the shadows of life, the sick, the needy, and the handicapped. And that is just on the lawn here to the south, near the statue of Hewitt H. Humphrey. And I want to just tie in to why the amendment is so important. And that is because of these words. And the fact that our hospitals in Minnesota and our orphanages and our homeless shelters and our women's shelters and our nursing homes have all been built by people of faith of all religions. They take care of our children, the homeless, and the sick, and the elderly. They heal the sick. They feed the hungry. They clothe the naked. They give water to the thirsty. The views that, as a Christian, we are told to do and asked to do by Jesus. But all faiths in the community see that as the priority number one. And that's why, in my humble opinion, that this amendment is so important that we adopt today. Because it's not a slap in the face to the very organizations that continue to do God's work in this state. We too are doing his work by funding and encouraging and helping the shelters and the hospitals and the nursing homes and the orphanages and the homeless shelters. And it appears to me that if this amendment is not adopted, it is a complete and utter slap in the face to exclude religion from our Constitution. The very peoples that will continue, no matter what we do here, to take care of those who we deem most vulnerable and helpful. And the audacity that we would exclude their good work, which was founded by religious organizations, and exempt them from our Constitution. I think that is shameful. It really is shameful. But no matter what we do down here, no matter what you on the other side do, because I will vote for this amendment, and I will vote against this constitutional amendment, the good people of faith, and even those who perhaps are still on the edge of their faith, but still working to help feed the poor, take care of the sick and the elderly, they will continue to do God's work, no matter what language you want to put, no matter how you want to change our Constitution. But just think about it as you vote against or for this amendment. What a slap in the face it is to organizations who take care of the most vulnerable in our state.
I recognize the member from Morrison, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the good work that has been done by Minnesotans of generations past and our founders to enshrine Section 16 of Article 1 in our state's Constitution. And I also appreciate the amendment that we're talking about today to ensure that all means all and that equal rights are for all, because this underlying bill does not do that, and it discriminates against people. It's exclusionary against people. We here in this House, the members of this House, have some of the most protected rights to speech in the nation. We here have the right to speak. We have some of the most protected First Amendment rights anywhere. And yet in this body, during this biennium, members have been called out for their speech, gavelled down in committees and hearings, and castigated because of speech. In the most protected place in Minnesota, the House of Representatives, the People's House. I appreciate that Representative Franson brought forward the question seeking to define how Minnesotans would be treated underneath this underlying bill, based upon instances that do happen in Minnesota today and will happen more and more often across this state if this amendment were to be passed and adopted by the people of Minnesota. There would be more discrimination. People's First Amendment rights would be attacked because of the underlying bill, which is why it's important that we adopt this A19 amendment, because all means all. And we do have those protections today for everyone. But this exclusionary underlying bill would create conflict within our own state constitution. And when such time as a conflict formally rises and moves through the court system over the coming few decades, what we know is that decision would most likely be ruled upon from political appointees, people appointed to courts from years of Democratic control. So I'm skeptical that the rights of Minnesotans would be protected. The First Amendment rights of Minnesotans would be protected when we create conflict within the bounds of our own Constitution. Because we know from the actions of this body, the members of this body, who have called out the free speech of members of this body, that somehow Minnesotans in the future would be in the exact same position. We already know that in workplaces throughout Minnesota, there are people who have their freedom of speech limited by their employers, or the fear that something that they say would cause them to lose their job or future opportunities. We in Minnesota today have the protection for equal rights. But this underlying bill restricts the rights of Minnesotans and creates concern for people's First Amendment rights. Because when our Constitution would be in conflict with one another, those decisions would be made, at least in the next few years, by a court that's been wholly appointed by Democrats. This is a purely partisan and political bill, not seeking to bring Minnesotans together, but to divide. That's what this bill does. But here before us right now, the A19 amendment presents an opportunity to return to the principles that all means all, that every Minnesotan would have their rights protected, not restricted like the underlying bill.
I recognize the member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Madam Speaker, members, Representative Demuth, thank you for a great amendment. This amendment would actually make this constitutional amendment question constitutional by our U.S. Constitution. The way it's written now, it doesn't grant equal rights to all. Yet in our Constitution, federal Constitution, it does. As Representative Schultz said, this amendment divides this state into categories. You have extra rights, you have extra rights, oh, you don't. It's unfortunate. And the way this is written, I don't think it'd stand up to constitutionally be valid. Now, when I grew up, I was taught that we're all God's people, every single one of us. In fact, our DNA is almost identical. There's a few minor differences that give us our individual characteristics. But other than that, we're identical. We're all the same. Created by God. Now, not only me, but most Republicans that I know believe that we're all the same and that every single person should have the same rights. Everyone should be treated the same. Our federal Constitution gives us the right to pursue happiness. It doesn't guarantee happiness. It gives us an opportunity to pursue it. But if we all are on the same equal playing ground, we all have an opportunity. But giving certain people extra rights doesn't help. It divides this state. It divides the people. And the best way to conquer an enemy is to divide. I don't know who the enemy you're talking about is, but by dividing, you're going to war after somebody. I don't know who that is. It'll make things worse. Now, I've looked up the definition of all, as others have said. That means everyone. Whether it's Representative Finke or Representative Davis, we're all the same. God made each and every one of us and gave all of us special characteristics. That's why equal rights means everyone. Everyone is equal. Members, please support the Demuth Amendment. It's the right way to go. I believe it actually stand up to constitutional questions and not be thrown out for being unconstitutional. Vote for this amendment.
Further discussion. I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Demuth.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the discussion that's gone on this very important amendment. I do have concerns. I believe they will be addressed as we continue moving through discussion today. One of the questions that comes to mind is, as we heard the author of the bill say that don't worry about religion, it's already included. But yet I know from the amendments, there's another representative in this body that has an amendment that's going to add religion back in. I will not ask the author to yield for a question, but I am wondering what other things are potentially already included, but yet we maybe haven't drawn an amendment to bring focus on those, and that is of grave concern. I want to bring the body back before we go to that roll call vote on a couple of the pieces of this and what my amendment would really do. If you look at the bill, whether you're looking online or if you have the physical copy in front of you, I happen to have the physical copy in front of me, what this amendment would do is on lines 1.9, it would read, if you pass this, it would say all persons shall be guaranteed equal rights and freedom from discrimination under the laws of this state. And then the rest would end. That does include all, which is what we are trying to get to. As a person that has been discriminated both publicly and in private my entire life, to know that I am already provided with equal rights in the state of Minnesota, it brings me great concern to know that you would not just end the language at for all. You would list, because where are we missing what is going to be coming up? You are potentially trying to change our Constitution in a way that will directly discriminate against people or organizations that you have chosen not to put on your list by choice. And I won't believe that things are already covered. Don't worry about it, because we have seen over this last 2 years in a full trifecta the changes and what has been done to our state in a way that it will take generations to overcome. The other thing that my amendment will do, again, on the back, after line 2.6, it's going to just bring clarification. And why would you not want to vote yes for clarification, stating that the state does not include non-state or private entities receiving public funds or otherwise participating in public programs or conferring a public benefit. We know there are $72 billion of state money that goes out all the time. There are concerns that have been brought up by my colleagues to do with religious organizations, meaning churches, universities, and how they would be included in this. We do know that public funding was taken away from pregnancy resource centers last year because of the actions of the majority in this body. But what I'm asking for here is that we would just clarify on after line 2.6, we would just bring clarity to what potentially would be included on this constitutional amendment. I am hoping that you will vote green with us to bring clarity and to make sure that everyone in the state of Minnesota continues to have equal rights that we have and will continue to, that we don't depend on a list just created in this legislature, but that all would be created, or all would be able to have the equal rights that we already have, that we don't have a list created by a party. And the other concern I will bring up, as we heard yesterday in a press conference, that the author said that this language has been worked on behind the scenes. Again, I'm going to raise that question. If things are being worked on in the dark, behind the scenes, after full Democrat control in the state of Minnesota for the last 2 years, why would you wait till the final hours, the final 36 hours, to try to push this through? Is it because you didn't want to be transparent to the voters of Minnesota with what you're trying to do? Because I would think if this has been such a great priority, you would have blown the doors open wide and got your message forward. I have grave concerns of why we are pushing this type of change to the Minnesota Constitution in the last few hours, as opposed to being transparent from the front. If it is such a great idea, you would have done this earlier. Members, again, make sure that equal rights will be for all and vote green on the A19 amendment.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk would take the names of the members who are voting remotely.
Carol.
Carol, no.
Carol, no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 59 ayes and 67 noes, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Torkelson moves to amend Senate File number 37, the unofficial engrossment. The amendment is coded A8.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Torkelson.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. If there's one thing I know, every 24 hours I get a day older. And I think the rest of you do too. We're all headed for an older stage of our lives. Us lucky ones that get to our retirement age are fortunate, but none of us deserve at any of those stages to be discriminated against because of our age. 2 out of 3 people from the ages of 45 to 72 report that they are discriminated against. This body and its work of this biennium has indicated to me that they don't really care that much about the elderly. We battled long and hard last year to try and get funds for nursing homes. We got some funds at the very end, but only after a long, hard battle. We've seen a proposal for an assisted suicide bill come before this body. We know that it greatly impacts the elderly. At the same time, we tend to admire how many folks that do maintain their careers as an elderly person. In fact, right now we have 2 presidential candidates that are both well into their 70s, and we, for different reasons, for different perspectives, we admire them both because they're functioning well, at least we think so, at their age. And there are others, we admire some folks. We admire Jane Fonda because she's still doing it in her 70s, 80s actually. Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the world, is still functioning well into his 90s. But, Madam Speaker, if the author of the bill would stand for a question.
She will. Representative Torkelson.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Herr, for some reason, we've left age out of this proposed amendment. It was in the old one, and for some reason, we've decided, I don't know why, that age is no longer important. That's for some reason, ageism doesn't exist when we know very well it does. What's happened here?
Representative Herr.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Torkelson, for that question, because I do appreciate the opportunity to clarify why age is not in there. And I want to be very clear that impugning the DFL's motives that we don't care about the elderly, we care very much about the elderly. I come from a community that actually reveres and honors our elderly probably more than most cultures do. And so I just want to state that very clearly for the record. The reason why age was left out is because that There are already laws in place that take age into consideration. We know that minors need to be protected differently than adults. We also know that the elderly need to be protected differently. We have mandatory age requirements for judge retirementships. We have age requirements for drinking, for smoking, for driving, for renting a car, for reserving a hotel room. There are many, many ways, for voting. So there are many ways in which that age actually is already looked at differently in the eyes of the law. And so including age in this actually would complicate the current existing laws around age, but that we value age very much so, and that's why age is protected in the human rights laws, and it's something that we continue to constantly work through because it is such an important issue to our state and lawmakers and individuals who are protecting people of ages for different reasons, whether they're children or adults.
Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before I forget, I request a roll call on this.
Seeing 15 hands, there'll be roll call. Representative Torkelson.
Well, thank you, Representative Herr, for that those remarks. Yes, there are reasons why some elderly who are physically disabled cannot do certain things like drive their car if they're not capable, but that's not what this is about. This is about discrimination against the elderly based solely on their age, not on their abilities. And we need to put this language back in. It's important, and I hope that we will pass this amendment and get this language back in the shape it should be.
Discussion. I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I heard the author say, because we already have laws doing it. Well, the purpose of this bill is beyond setting new laws. It's, you do something to the Constitution, that's above. And if something's lacking here, there's a need to put some, you're going to do an amendment, you want to have it complete. You're not doing an amendment because there aren't things in law. So to say we're not going to do age because it's already in laws. So why are you doing this at all anyway? So, that's a valid question on the reasoning. And if you're going to take this next step and affect the Constitution, you should do it in a fair and complete fashion. And that's what this amendment is trying to do. So I don't accept that reasoning as a reason not to actually do a good job if we're going to do this. Vote for the amendment.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. And since I just got a year older, this age thing is getting more important to me. So I have a different view today than I did earlier this week. So thank you, Representative Torkelson. But Representative Herr, I was really concerned when you answered, what this bill is doing. I mean, we're putting it on the ballot in the Constitution to protect from discrimination. I mean, right now, our Human Rights Act in Minnesota protects age, but this is taking it out of the courts. That's an intermediate being scrutinized in the intermediate area in courts. And when we put it into the Constitution, we're elevating that to a much higher level. And so I'm curious, and if the author of the bill would yield.
She will yield. Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'm curious, Representative Herr, why we're going to set, certain things, and we're going to say that we're going to elevate these to a constitutional level of discriminatory protection, but yet we're going to allow aging people like me, not those same constitutional protections.
Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Nadeau, I am getting older too, and I'm going to actually turn another year older in June, so very real to me as well. And I would just like to point out that on age, right, this amendment would actually this amendment would actually enhance our laws to prevent age discrimination. I think that it is important for us to, I think we're trying to have these conversations in looking at one point in time, and I would just encourage the body to look at where laws have been overturned based on case laws, where laws have been narrowed, where statutes have been narrowed, all of which to see what is setting precedent, right? And so I would say that this actually does not, should not impact the concerns around age, and that age is something that our state and actually, really chooses to protect and wants to protect, and that's why we have very strong laws on the books for that. So,
Representative Nadeau.
And thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Herr. I recognize that if this, if it were up to the intent to diminish existing protections is not something that you're trying to you're not trying to limit that. But I'm not worried about you and I today. I'm worried about down the road. And the other thing is, and I think it's members, I think it's a little bit bigger than this. I looked at the Nevada language, I looked at the New York language, and I've spoken 3 or 4 times this year on model language. And I hate model language. I don't care where it comes from. If it comes from the right, it comes from the left, model language is always bad. Almost always bad. Most of the time it's bad, Madam Speaker. It's bad. Model language is bad. The language that we're looking at here today is the exact same language that's in Nevada with a few words, a few different words around pregnancy. It's the same exact language that's in New York that's going to be on their ballot. It's the same language. Minnesota is better than this. The fact that we're not going to accept Representative Torkelson's amendment to protect seniors to the same level that we're willing to protect others that are specifically listed, Madam Speaker, it's preposterous. So, Representative Torkelson, thank you for bringing this amendment. Being an aging person, I am happy to vote yes on this thing, and I would recommend everyone else vote green. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Members, there is an amendment to the amendment, so we'll address that amendment first, and then we'll go back to the discussion. The clerk will report the amendment to the amendment.
NISCA moves to amend the Torkelson Amendment to Senate File Number 37, the unofficial engrossment. The amendment to the amendment is coded A39.
I'll recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And first, I'd like to request a roll call.
Seeing 15 hands, there will be roll call. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members, and I appreciate that we laid a little bit of a foundation about this age issue. First of all, because I think it's important that we, as we think about Representative Herr's comments about age, that we recognize that there are a number of the categories that we're looking at here, whether we're talking about national origin or disability or sex, where there is some ability for the state to legislate in those areas. We, for example, prohibit voting based on people's citizenship, even though that might impact national origin. So it's fine and it's good that Representative Torkelson that we are wanting to put age into this amendment. But there are some necessary, I think, technical corrections that need to be made. And so the A39 is adding some technical additions to the age issue, because there are some ways in which age does get a little bit tricky. And so the A39 amendment does 3 technical corrections or additions to the age provision. The first is that it clarifies when we're talking about state compelling interests, something that I think we all agree on. We've had many discussions about this, that the state has a compelling governmental interest in protecting children under the age of majority, and that is going to be more important than the other rights that are claimed under this section. I think it's important, as we're looking at and having this discussion, about the potential for exploitation of kids that might be opened up by some of the topics that are raised as a result of this amendment. For example, when we're talking about abortion and sex trafficking type of concerns, or the sex change industry, for example, the potential for exploitation of kids in that area, it's important that we make clear that the state has a compelling state interest in protecting kids. The second important technical clarification is making clear that, and this is language that we all passed out of this House about a year ago unanimously that it says that an adult's physical or sexual attraction to a child under the age of majority is not protected under this section or under any state law. Unfortunately, some clarification language that we passed unanimously out of this body never made it into state statutes. And again, while it's important that we do put age into this constitutional amendment if we're going to protect all Minnesotans, we do need to make clear, both for purposes of this constitutional amendment and for any other ambiguity that might be raised in any other state law, that we are not creating in any way a protected classification for people who are adults who are attracted to children. When we had this discussion last year, I think it's important to remember that there was a lot of discussion about the criminal prohibitions against pedophilia that also exist in our statutes. Well, if we create ambiguity in our Constitution around that, then those criminal penalties do become up for grabs. And I think we need to make sure that we put in this clarifying language by amending the Torkelson Amendment. The final clarification that this adds is that nothing in this section prohibits the state from complying with a federal requirement or condition of receiving federal funds. So there are situations in which, for example, our federal highway funds are conditioned on having a certain drinking age. Obviously, we don't want to create a situation in which we are putting that at risk. So those are the technical amendments to the Torkelson Amendment, which I think is a very important underlying amendment. Again, if we're going to say that equal rights for all means equal rights for all, and if we're going to respect the elderly, as I'm sure that we all agree, Representative Herr, with that, then we should pass the Torkelson Amendment, but we should do so with these technical corrections. So I urge members' support.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Herr.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Nisko. What you are trying to protect in this amendment is already illegal. Nothing in the ERA changes that, so I recommend a no vote.
Discussion. I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'm just wanting to support the Niska amendment, and it's concerning to me that when we have concerns about protecting especially children under the age of majority, that's brushed off and said, oh, that's already protected under law. Age is already protected under law. Members, everything in this amendment is already protected in the Human Rights Act. So then if that's the answer, why are we doing this? Everything listed in this amendment is protected under the Human Rights Act right now. So if the answer is we don't need further constitutional protections, then we do not need this amendment. If that is not the case, then we absolutely need the Niska amendment to protect minor children in this state, and I urge support for the amendment to the amendment. Thank you.
Further discussion. I recognize the member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and members, and thank you, Representative Niska, for the reminder, the little history lesson on what happened last year, because we did have agreement on this, and I think it passed with 100% green votes. I think it was 100% of this body voted to include this language, put this language into law last year, and somehow magically it disappeared, actually, when we got a bill back from conference. That's what happened. So actually, Representative Herr, this is not in law. This is not in law. And I'll tell you what, and like I said, I apologize to my Republican colleagues, but I'll call you out too, because it's both sides of the aisle. Both sides of the aisle like to talk about parental rights when it is convenient to whatever issue you're talking about. And in this situation, it is more convenient for the Democrats to talk about, well, it's not up to the children. Let's have some consistency. Nothing should be a higher priority for a single member of this body than protecting children. Not one thing. Nothing we do here, and I mean nothing, not a dollar we spend, not a system we fund, not a dollar of welfare, nothing we do in this body matters more than protecting children. Nothing. And I am so sick of the inconsistency on this. This is not in law. There is no protection for children regarding minor attracted persons. There is no protection in law for those children. It does not exist. Once again, we're being told, don't believe your lying eyes. I sure hope somebody can stand up, chooses to stand up and tell us, oh, of course it's already in law, here it is. But let's be very clear. We are enshrining this Equal Rights Amendment into the Constitution. And guess what trumps state law? The Constitution. Any law written will be weighed against the Constitution. And so when a very liberal Supreme Court in the state of Minnesota has a case before them, how exactly do you think they're going to decide? Because I've got a hunch. Don't tell me what's in state law. Because frankly, as Representative Robbins pointed out, this entire dang thing is in state law. But apparently that's not good enough for everything else. So I sure hope the least we can do is say it's not good enough for our children. If we are going to protect anyone, if we are going to enshrine in our Constitution the protection of anyone, it should be our kids. The fact that anyone would stand up and recommend we vote no on this is an absolute embarrassment and a disgrace to this body. This is a disgrace. And this is exactly the problem with this underlying amendment, with the underlying Equal Rights Amendment. It's more equal for some than for others. And we're choosing to make it more equal for adults than for children? That's what this body is going to choose? It is disgusting. It is absolutely disgusting that this amendment would even be a question mark. Boy, I know there's things I can't say on this House floor. This is disgusting. The fact that anyone would consider voting no on this, it's absolutely disgusting. Let's get our priorities straight. Let's understand that our highest moral obligation is to protect our children. If you haven't done that soul searching, and I get not everybody has, I encourage you, do that soul searching. Because sometimes in this body we do have to decide between things we believe in, which is the higher moral code. But my goodness, for every single one of us at the top of that list should be protecting kids. The fact that this is even a question mark is absolutely abhorrent and disgusting.
I recognize the member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Madam Speaker, Representative New, thank you. I want to remind this body what our state constitution says in the very first sentence. Government is instituted for the security, benefit, and protection of the people. And those people, little kids, our children. This bill that's before us for a constitutional amendment, the way it's currently written, without this amendment and the underlying amendment, would basically allow pedophiles in our little kids, in little girls' bathrooms or little boys' bathrooms. Is that protecting them? I'm ashamed of this body even bringing this bill forward, that we have to do an amendment to protect our children, and we're told to vote no. Anybody that votes no should leave this building now and retire because they're not protecting the citizens of Minnesota. Vote for the amendment.
Further discussion. Representative Torkelson.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to thank Representative Niska for bringing this amendment forward, and it brings some very important perspective to this amendment. As Representative Brindley has expressed, protecting our children is by far the most important thing we can do as legislators. Our children are precious, and they deserve constitutional protection. Thank you, Representative Niska, for bringing this forward.
Further discussion. I recognize the author, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for those of you who have spoken up in support of our kids. You know, I hope every Minnesotan watches this little clip here and the vote that comes up after this. I think this is going to be a very, very clear distillation of, number one, which party should be in control of this state, and number two, whether or not anyone should vote for this so-called Equal Rights Amendment. You know, the governor put out a fact sheet in support of his budget last year talking about making Minnesota the best state in the country for kids. And the only person on this floor who spoke from the party of the governor said, don't vote to protect kids because it's already in state law. Well, Representative Brindley is absolutely right. We're talking about amending the Constitution, and the Constitution trumps anything in state law. So it doesn't matter what we have in the Minnesota statutes if we put language into the Minnesota Constitution that doesn't protect kids. And that's what this amendment does. So I hope the people of Minnesota are paying attention, because that is literally the only thing that was said on this House floor against why we would vote against this amendment. Literally the only thing. Again, in a constitutional amendment that was negotiated behind closed doors over many months, rammed through one committee with this new language that was workshopped behind closed doors, rammed through one committee, and we're having one debate on it. And the only thing that those in support of this amendment, this constitutional amendment, can say against including language to protect kids is it's already protected in state law. That's not good enough. That's not good enough. Vote yes.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk would take the roll. The clerk will call the names of the members who are voting remotely.
Carol.
There you go.
Carol, no.
Carol, no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 60 ayes and 66 noes, the motion does not prevail. The amendment to the amendment is not adopted. Members, we go back now to the A8, and we'll continue discussion. I recognize the member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Boy, I was fired up before we took that last vote. Representative Torkelson, thank you for the amendment. Adding age to protected persons. And my understanding, I should have verified again, I should have gone back to look one more time, but that this language is actually lifted directly from the Human Rights Act. It's not new language, but this is exactly the problem we have with the underlying Equal Rights Amendment. We are choosing to make some more equal than others. This is the problem, and it's exactly why we should have adopted the A19 and said all people should be treated equally under the law, everyone. Because now we're picking winners and losers. Now we are deciding exactly the list who gets to be treated equally, and now age doesn't make the cut. If you are a senior citizen, you don't make the cut. You don't get to be treated equally under the law. That's what the Democrats are saying. You don't get to be treated unequally. Excuse me, you don't get to be treated equally under the law. What a sham. Oh, I cannot wait to get out of this body and go talk to the people of Minnesota and tell them what this actually does. And tell them that if the Democrats get control again, watch out, because next it's assisted suicide, and you're not protected based on age. We're leaving that out. Some are more equal than others. Man, I sure hope that I'm like one of the pigs that gets to live in the house. I hope I'm that unequal. But our senior citizens aren't going to be. Our kids are not going to be. They don't make the cut. What's really fascinating is that groups of people who are protected in our Human Rights Act have been left out of the constitutional amendment. Democrats literally chose to leave out groups of people on purpose for protection in the Constitution. You chose it on purpose. This is directly from the Human Rights Act. And in drafting this Constitution, you went, well, maybe not old people. Maybe we don't need to enshrine protection for our kids in the Constitution. How in God's green earth did you come to that decision? Because it's in law? The whole darn thing is in law. And yet some people are going to get protection under the Constitution. But not everybody. Not everybody. And just wait until Representative Niska's amendment to the amendment, just wait until that's what we start hearing about more broadly, because we already hear about it. We already hear about this, minor attracted persons. We're trying to rebrand pedophilia. Just wait until we start hearing about that. Well, not protected. Not protected. It's unreal. Democrats are talking about picking winners and losers. That's how they presented this, right? We can't, ironically, they're twisting it, right? They're telling us that we can't start pulling people out because we're picking winners and losers, but we also can't add anyone. Because we wouldn't want to pick more winners to be equally protected under the law. In what? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. This is absolutely freaking bizarre. That we are deciding, we are choosing who gets to be equally protected under the law. And we're leaving out age on purpose. It's in the Human Rights Act, not going to be in the Constitution. Honestly, I cannot wait to get out of this building and start talking to Minnesotans about what this does. Because they're going to be just as disgusted and flabbergasted as I am.
I recognize the member from St. Louis, Representative Scraba.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative New Brindley, you are a hard act to follow because everything you said is what I was going to try to talk about. One of the things I do want to bring up, and age. I turned another year. I'm going to turn another year. I don't understand why age is not on here. Age needs to be on here. Age is just, it's really not that big of an ad for y'all just to vote yes. Put age on there. Age belongs there. Every one of the on the list now is already covered under law. We have race laws, color laws, national origin laws, ancestry laws, disability laws, sex laws, everything. They all have laws. So put age on there. Age belongs there. Age needs to be on there. Please vote green. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Members, I'm speechless after that last vote. Can't believe it. We have an opportunity to protect our kids and keep them safe from pedophiles. Instead, we want to make it a pedophile sanctuary state, I guess. But let's move on. As Representative New stated, and these things that are in this constitutional amendment are already protected by law. But we want to give them extra protections, but not to our kids, and not to our adults, our seniors. Because age is already protected by law. But laws can be changed. I see you have some things in here that are protected by law, including one of the most egregious abortion laws in the state, or in the country, actually the world. But you want to put that in there to make it a constitutional amendment so it can't be changed. One of our members just recently had a child born in their family. Extremely premature. Last I heard, and I'm grateful, that child is doing fabulous. Age needs to be in here. Age is important. But I guess we can't have that because of another bill that was entered this year, assisted suicide. So family members can have their parents or seniors disposed of if they aren't doing well. Sickening. Members, if we're going to do this, all people should have the same rights. Every single one of us. Our seniors, our little infants, and as far as I'm concerned, even those children in the womb. All should be created equal. Every Minnesotan. Instead, looks like we want to separate, divide, to get certain votes from certain groups. Members, we're one state, as the governor said, one Minnesota. This isn't a one Minnesota bill. This is a divided bill. Please at least add age onto it, even though we're not going to protect our children. Let's protect our seniors.
I recognize the member from Goodhue, Representative Altendorf.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. You know, let's just kind of reset here, right? I truly believe, everyone in this chamber, that we all want equal rights for all, and all means all. And I'm talking to the majority members now on this amendment. Thank you, Representative Torkelson, for offering this amendment. And if we're going to start carving out groups that's included in the language specifically, we are now going down a road of very specifically naming groups that are protected, and that also opens up the door of classes or groups that are not protected. And so age needs to be included. I don't believe there's a single member in the majority party that wants people to be discriminated against for their age. I just don't believe that. I believe that the majority party wants to make sure that the elderly in Minnesota are not discriminated against. And yet, if we do not accept Representative Torkelson's amendment, where this is very, very simple, we are amending in that age is part of that protected class, then we cannot be sure, we cannot leave this a gray area. We should not leave this, that's being very sloppy as legislators. We're leaving this up to a judge or a human decision in the future that we do not know the circumstances of yet to why this would come up. I know Representative Hersh said it's already in place. It's already protected. Age is already protected. Members, this is simple. This is really, really simple. For the elderly people in Minnesota, if Representative Hersh is correct and this is already protected in our Minnesota laws, this is very simple. You will vote green on this amendment to make sure then that it is also protected in our Constitution. Members, this is easy. Many people of religious faith, we respect life from birth until death. And as of late, we are really seeing a trend where nursing homes are struggling. They don't have the funding. We're seeing bills of assisted suicide being promoted. We know that the cost of elderly care is very, very expensive. And for all of these reasons, these are facts. We cannot leave this up to a gray area. We cannot. The state of Minnesota needs to clearly say that in our Constitution, all means all, and that there is no discrimination based on age. Please vote green for the elderly people of Minnesota. Please vote green, showing them that us as legislators, that we're going to be very clear in our language, and we're going to make sure that all classes are protected.
I recognize the member from St. Louis, Representative Zelesnigar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I too rise to support the provision in this bill that talks about age. And when I look at this bill, One Minnesota means a bill that's for all Minnesotans. And if we're doing divisive carve-outs, it's not a bill that's for all Minnesotans. The bill that was proposed, the language, does not do that. I'm going to read to you the Human Rights Amendment for Minnesota right now. Has race, religion, disability, national origin, sex, marital status, familiar status, age, sexual orientation, and gender identity. And the governor just signed and added religion. These protections against Minnesotans allow you protection in business, with your credit, with education, with housing, with public accommodations, and public services, and they're called protected areas of employment, for employment, and when you're applying for a job. So age does matter. This bill allows for divisive carve-outs. That would be a constitutional amendment. Should this go on the ballot, should this be approved, that would trump anything in state law. That's just the reality of this. So if something's not in it, it doesn't matter where it is somewhere else, because it's not going to have the prevailing weight of protections that that the items in a constitutional amendment would have. The ERA that's being proposed right now is clearly not my grandma's ERA. It's not for all, which was what was fought for. And so I'm just saying, think of the people that are 50 years old and older. We have an aging bracket. I'm in that. Many have felt in time that they were discriminated by age. When they hit that 50-year mark, and pretty soon you're not a person that an employer might want to keep around. You're higher paid, you're cost more money. You all of a sudden are not going to have the protections in this language when people are living to 90, 100, and people need to work at 50. I don't know how many of you are in the 50-plus crowd in here, but I sure am. And I'm guessing when you get to that point and you are making more money with your years of experience, you're probably going to want to have protections of age. You're not going to want to be a part of the mass layoffs because you cost more money to be employed. Age matters. And we need to think about it when we're doing a constitutional amendment. Equal rights for age, equal rights for religion matter, and they cannot be left out. Leader Dameth offered an amendment that would allow equal rights based on the 1970s version that was passed by several other states. I support that. We must support, if we're going to do carve-outs, it needs to be something that has absolutely everybody in it, not exclusions, or we have not accomplished what equal rights stands for. It's the erasure of rights is what this is going to do, because we're picking winners, and that's what this does. So members, I urge you to vote to make sure age is a part of any platform of change, because we are an aging population in the state of Minnesota, and your rights should matter when you're young as much as it is all the way to your death. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the member from Polk, Representative Keel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Torkelson, we've been working together more than once on aging, and I've been here long enough to have some real conversations about protecting our elderly. It seemed to be important in the Tribune to talk about what was happening to our elderly in facilities, different facilities. And unfortunately, those things happened. So we created some more laws to protect elderly at the time. Created real problems for our nursing homes, created real problems for our facilities of different kinds, even at home with direct care and treatment. There were stories, but I fear that this large group of Minnesotans, because that's what we are, is I put myself in that category because I too am aging, and over that deal in the restaurant where the waitress says, and do you qualify for the senior discount? And at first I'd have to think about it a little bit and go, yeah, I guess I do. Wow, how'd that happen? But the point is that the majority of Minnesotans are aging. We all are going to age sometime, but to make sure that we make aging the majority of age of majority, there, I'm stuttering and I'll get it out. Anyway, the age of a majority should be part of a protected class. It is important to make sure that they are cared for, that we are cared for, that we have protective rights, just like smaller groups of people in Minnesota. And if we can't protect seniors, actually children too, but what a shame. What a shame that we are not saying in the Equal Rights Amendment that seniors, aging, even anybody over 50, like Representative Zaleznikar said, it just is important because we need to protect them. We've always acknowledged that. So why are we having a problem with it now? I believe that we should consider this a green amendment. We should protect all Minnesotans, as we've talked about, and certainly one of our largest classes are aging Minnesotans, and we need to consider that. So I would encourage you to vote green on this amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Further discussion. I recognize Representative Davis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Herr, you had said earlier that it should not impact the concerns around age. And you said the reason why age was left out, there was already laws in place that take age into consideration. Would Representative Herr yield for a question?
She will yield. Representative Davis.
Representative Herr, do you remember, I just want to make it known for the body, do you remember saying that earlier?
Representative Herr.
Thank you, Speaker. And yes, Representative Davis, yes.
Representative Davis.
Well, Representative Davids is a little bit better looking than I am, but yes, thank you. So if age discrimination, and that's what we're talking about here. Thank you, Representative Torkelson, for this amendment. I think this is a pretty easy one to support, members. So we're talking about age discrimination, and you had said it was already in law, so it's already protected. So my question is if she would continue to yield.
She will yield. Representative Davis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is gender identity already protected in the Minnesota Human Rights Act?
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
State your point of order.
Masons 101, we are talking about the A8 amendment, which is referring to age. Gender identity was coming up soon. If a member wants to speak to that, he can when we get to that amendment.
Members, please confine your remarks to the A8 amendment. Representative Davis.
Oh, it's very interesting, Madam Speaker. She made those comments on this amendment, Representative Long. No, you did not. Am I mistaken? Well, I apologize then. But it does have to do with age, the elderly. And so I'm trying to correlate here, trying to connect the dots here. Why wouldn't we protect the elderly in constitutional law? That's what I'm trying to get at. So if she would yield to that question.
Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Davis, the language that we have before us is the right language for Minnesotans, and that lots of much smarter people, constitutional lawyers and lawyers from Department of Human Rights and lawyers who practice this type of law, we consulted with them, and this is the language that is right for Minnesotans.
Representative Davis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, I just will point out that we are picking winners and losers here, obviously, if you vote no on this amendment, which you've already voted no previously. So with that, I will thank you, Madam Speaker.
Further discussion. I recognize the author, Representative Torkelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Republicans believe in equal rights for all. Had you accepted the Demuth Amendment, we wouldn't even need to be doing this amendment because it would already be taken care of with that general language. But by going behind closed doors and picking a select group to list in this constitutional amendment, we're not really protecting all. This sends a message to the courts. This is the Constitution. It sends a message to the courts that for some reason the age is not as important a category as the other ones that are listed. The fact that, as the author has said more than once now, that because it's in statute, that somehow we don't need to worry about it in this ERA amendment, just doesn't settle. Age should be right on a list. There shouldn't be a list, actually. But if there's going to be a list, it seems to me that age should be included. This sends a message to the courts and to the citizens of Minnesota that somehow age is not as high a category or high a priority as the other things listed. Members, please vote green on this amendment.
The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the names of the members who are voting remotely.
Carroll.
There you go.
Carroll, no.
Carroll, no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 59 ayes and 68 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. Representative Robbins offers the following amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
Robbins moves to amend Senate File Number 37, the unofficial engrossment. The amendment is coded A11.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. The A11 amendment is a very simple amendment. It just tries to make clear that when we're talking about prohibiting the state from engaging in discrimination, that we're very clear about who is defined, who is the state. And so there were some comments made in the Rules Committee when this bill was brought up that were very concerning to a lot of folks, especially folks in the religious community, about who is a state actor and what who might be allowed to or who might be who this provision might apply to, and that it might apply to, for example, entities that have public funds or that are participating in public programs, not just the state or the state's subdivisions. And so the A11 amendment just very clearly states that for purposes of this section, the state does not include a private or non-state entity that receives public funds or otherwise participates in a public program or confers a public benefit. And members, I want to tell a little bit of a story about why this is so important that should be somewhat familiar to all of us. Last year, we had a discussion on this floor about amendments to the post-secondary enrollment options program. And members of the majority advocated for a change in that eligibility requirement that were targeted at two particular colleges that represent a particular subset of the Christian faith, I think is the words of that the chief author used. So, of course, those colleges challenged that provision. And in response to that constitutional challenge, members, perhaps those of you on the other side of the aisle don't know this, but in response to that constitutional challenge, the Minnesota Department of Education, run by the Commissioner of Education appointed by Governor Walz, and the Minnesota Attorney General's office representing the Minnesota Department of Education, sued Crown and Northwestern with counterclaims, claiming that Crown College and University of Northwestern St. Paul, two private Christian schools, are violating the Constitution and arguing that those two colleges are state actors. That is the argument being made by the Democrat Department of Education and the Democrat Attorney General in the state of Minnesota. So I think it makes sense that some folks in the faith communities are a little concerned that maybe Representative Herr's claims that religion is already protected and there's no need to worry about it. They might be a little concerned when there is a constitutional amendment without a religious exclusion, for example, and without religion included in it, that might apply to them as state actors. And so the A11 amendment is just a simple clarification to make clear that when we're talking about prohibiting discrimination by the state, we're really talking about discrimination by the state or by counties or cities or other government entities, and not about private organizations. So the A11 amendment, Madam Speaker, is a simple clarification on that front, and I would request a roll call.
Seeing 15 hands, there will be roll call. I recognize the member, Representative Niska. I recognize the member, Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I'd recommend a no vote for the very simple rule that if you look at 2.5, this actually tells you, for the purposes of this section, state may mean the state or an agency or political subdivision of the state. If you don't believe the plain language of the constitutional amendment, you should also take comfort in the fact that case law, federal case law, makes it clear, as well as Minnesota case law, about the question of who the state actor is and the constitutional analysis. Merely receiving state funds does not turn private action into state action. In fact, the Supreme Court, in their analysis, determined that only when it can be said that the state is responsible for the specific conduct of which the plaintiff complains, do you have that issue. And I would just sort of end with, I actually think adding this language makes it less clear. Because this says, public funds, public programs confer benefits, but what about a set of other things, TIF districts, that kind of thing. Going with the plain language and saying it means a state or any agency or the political subdivision is the right way to do this, and the constitutional analysis backs that up. So members, I'd ask you to vote no.
Discussion. I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My apologies for not being on the floor when it was called. I thought on the list I was 2 amendments away. Members, this is a really important amendment. We've had some of this discussion earlier, but during the Rules Committee, which, just to regroup, this bill had one stop in the House of Representatives, which was the Rules Committee, not a substantive committee. It didn't go to Judiciary, didn't go to State Gov, where some of these issues could have been addressed. It came before the Rules Committee, and during the committee, I specifically asked the question about state actors. And the question was, would someone who receives state funds be considered a state actor? And the author said, possibly, could be. And so this is being very clear that for purposes of a constitutional amendment, the state actor does not include a private or non-state entity that receives public funds or participates in a public program or confers a public benefit. And this is so important, members, because we're concerned about this bill and this constitutional amendment if it just applies to the state. But if it applies to anyone who receives a public benefit or public funds, then that is going to severely impact, for example, the religious rights of private schools, of hospitals, of any faith-based institution, a nonprofit, any of those groups that may administer public funds, because religion is not included in this, could have their religious rights infringed on. And this is very concerning. And so I appreciate that there's some sense by the majority that, oh no, state actor is very clear in case law, but it is not, members, which is why we need it clear in a constitutional amendment. So one of the cases that, and I have a lot of stuff here on my desk, but one of the cases that I know will affect this, that I think is really important for the protection of women and girls, which we'll talk about more in other amendments, but whether if a school participates in state high school league programs, would they still be able to have girls-only teams? And there's a case out there called Brentwood Academy v. Tennessee Secondary Schools Association, where the court determined that the Tennessee version of the State High School League, it was the Secondary School Association, Athletic Association, I think it was called, was considered a state entity. And Justice Souter, writing for the majority, said the nominally private character of this athletic association is overborne by the pervasive entwinement of public institutions and public officials in its workings. And because the association could essentially coerce member schools to follow its rules, and the state would back it up, it was exercising state power. So members, this is exactly why we need this, because we're not protecting religious liberty, but we are creating state actors. And there's a Supreme Court case out there saying that, for example, just one example, State Athletic Association is considered a state actor. So then any school participating in high school league wouldn't have the opportunity to determine how they're running their sports programs. But members, there's many other cases out there about that. There are some that say that if you receive public funds, you are not acting as a state actor. And then there are others where, in fact, the performance of a public function is state action. So there are case law out there on both sides of this issue, and I've got, 12 cases I could list, but I'm not going to. But what I'm saying, members, is this is not settled. And there are examples on both sides where someone gets public funds and they're not considered a state actor. Or when they get public funds and they are considered a state actor based on the action taken. And as a constitutional amendment, we need to be crystal clear. So that's why this amendment is so important. It simply says, for purposes of this section, the state does not include a private or non-state entity that receives public funds or otherwise participates in a public program or confers a public benefit. We have to be clear on this, members. A private person could be considered a state actor if they're getting a state benefit. A nonprofit, if you get a tax deduction, you could maybe be considered a state actor. We have to be crystal clear on this, members. So I ask for a green vote. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Listen, we're going to have to figure out what our premise is here today, because you're going to have to pick one. You can't have both. The entire premise of the underlying bill is that existing law is insufficient, and so you need to amend the state constitution in order to ensure that the intended effect remains in perpetuity. And then when we offer amendments saying, okay, under that premise, we want to make sure that the law is interpreted properly. We want to make sure that the state does not include a private or non-state entity that receives public funds or otherwise participates in a public program or confers a public benefit. We're told, that doesn't need to be in there. It's already clear. It's in case law, which is a couple tiers down from the Constitution, right? So, you got to pick your premise. Either things are so important that we need to change our Constitution to calcify them, or they're not. And what we're hearing here today, this seeming conflict, because I get it, you don't see it as a conflict. Because what the debate is actually showcasing here is that it's only certain ideas that need to be calcified within our Constitution, and the rest can shift with the wind. We see what you're doing.
The member from Morrison, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I couldn't agree more with the comments that have been made by my colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle. And we, here on the Republican side of the aisle, we are fighting for equal rights because this bill does not do that. And in fact, it creates more discrimination in the eyes of our state constitution. And this amendment seeks to shore up a little bit of that. I gotta say, as someone, as a new member of this body, I always thought that Democrats were the ones fighting for civil rights, and that sometimes people on the right weren't quite doing that. At least that's what I thought from the mainstream media or from society. But what I've experienced over these last 2 years has been a complete abomination of the Constitution of the United States, of free speech, of the right to assemble, of the right to religious liberty. And I couldn't be more frustrated by it. And this bill is the latest attempt to enshrine discrimination into our Constitution. And when we bring motion after motion, amendment after amendment, to define what it means to have religious liberty, this body continues to say, we reject the Christian faith. We reject people who believe one certain thing. It's just gross to me. I have no better way to describe it. And when I get back home and talk to the people in my community, they're offended by the conversations that have happened in this body this biennium. And to hear that when we bring forward an amendment to provide specific protection in the Constitution of the state of Minnesota, that somehow, oh, no, we need to rely on case law. It's offensive. It's straight up offensive. Equal rights should be equal rights for all. They are in our current Constitution, but this bill strips those rights away. Here's an opportunity for you with the A11 amendment for us to light up the board green to support equal rights. And that's what we should do.
The member from Freeborn, Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate this amendment. I actually had written down some questions about this bill, and some of my questions are in regards to the definition of state in this proposed legislation and proposed amendment. So would the bill author yield for a question?
She will yield. Representative Bennett.
Thank you, and I apologize, my back's to you, Representative Herr. So my first question, and just in the realm of education, this concerns me quite a bit, and I'd like to ask some specific questions. I just have two. Would private schools that receive state funding for school lunch programs be included under the definition of state since they're receiving public funding?
Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Bennett, as Representative Greenman stated, that receiving money is not enough to determine if somebody is a state actor or not.
Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'm going to ask my other question anyway, because I would like this on the record. Would a homeschool family that receives public funding for school curriculum be included under the definition of state in this statute? Proposed statute.
Will you yield, Representative Herr? She will yield. Representative Herr.
Again, to determine if somebody is a state actor or not, it requires more than just looking at the funding that the individual receives.
Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize Representative Bakenberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think I just rise in support of this amendment, and it's really pretty simple, just clarifying language to not include private or non-state entities receiving public funds. And I hear what you're saying about your explanation for that. And I wasn't in rules, so I wasn't a part of that conversation. But there's a difference that we're hearing on the floor, and then it sounds like it's different than what was said in rules, where possibly these different entities, private entities that are receiving state funds, could be considered a state actor. Representative Bennett brought up the first thing that I thought of was the Universal Meals Program. We've heard on and on again about that, and actually I am grateful that private faith-based schools are receiving state dollars through the Universal Meals Program because they are part of the USDA program. So it just shows that public dollars can go to a private school. But I think the bigger concern that I have, and this kind of plays into a bigger picture perspective, is there's a pattern that I have noticed that if someone doesn't agree with the state's perspective on something, the state will use the power of the purse to influence or coerce you to submit to what you're going to do. Representative Robbins talked about the Minnesota State High School League. I was actually the principal of Representative Robbins' kids' school for a few years called Heritage Christian Academy. And it was during that time that there was some discussion about students and access to locker rooms and bathrooms if you were part of the Minnesota State High School League. And the question was brought, and it came before the league, the question was brought if a faith-based institution did not follow and allow that to happen, would they be allowed to be part of the league? And there was not clarity. Well, that's a really big deal, because if schools, whether they're faith-based schools or whether they're public schools, are not a part of the Minnesota State High School League, you can't participate in the state tournaments. You're going to have a hard time finding competition. So the thought, not impugning motives of anyone in this chamber or in that time, but the thought that I had as a high school principal was that's going to have a damaging effect on the enrollment of my school if we're not able to participate in high school league activities. So this inherent mistrust of others and lifestyles that are different than people in power have, it has to stop. We can't use the power of the purse to make people submit to your perspectives. That is why the A11 amendment is so important, to be able to make it very clear that you can still have state dollars for different areas and not have to give up your deeply held beliefs. Thank you. Support the A11 amendment.
The member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Madam Speaker, members, listening to this last few speakers shows how important this amendment is. We have in our Constitution and also in the federal Constitution freedom of religion. And what this amendment does is make sure that that continues. It can continue in our Christian schools. It can continue getting the summer program for feeding our kids that are in those schools. It can continue providing assistance in childcare that are done in our churches and our other religious institutions. We can't wait for the Supreme Court to decide on something like this. It's too late then. We need to make sure that this is in the bill at this time, if this is going to go forward, to make sure that they are protected and not divided. We need to make sure that if this goes forward to a constitutional amendment, that all means all. That equal rights includes everyone. Whether it's a Christian religion, secular, Muslim, Islam, doesn't matter. All protected the same. And without this in there, they are not. Members, please support the amendment.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Friedson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's hard to see over there when you're, so I'm glad, thank you for recognizing me. Members, I stand in support of the A11 amendment. Members, this sounds like we need to pass the amendment to find out how the amendment is going to affect Minnesotans. I'm looking at an article from the Catholic News Agency. Colorado can't refuse state funds to Christian school over gender policies. And it took a judge to rule on that, on October 20th, that the state cannot discriminate against the school based on its religious beliefs about gender ideology. And I just think that we do not need to be passing an amendment that will be creating lawsuits. And this amendment would clarify that Christian schools, private schools, would be a non-state entity. I mean, we do not even know the definition of what a non-state entity is, members. So I ask you to support the A11 amendment, and let's put some clarification and guardrails into the ERA. Thank you.
The member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Herr, I wanted to follow up a little bit on the questions that Representative Bennett asked you. And I just want to maybe give you a little bit more background about what the Walz Education Department and the Attorney General's Office are arguing in the Crown and Northwestern case, which is not just that Crown and Northwestern are receiving state funding, but that because they participate in providing K-12 education, and the requirement to provide education is in the state constitution, that makes them state actors. And so I wanted to ask again, just for some clarity from Representative Herr, if she will yield.
She will yield. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And so, Representative Herr, you said that the providing of funding alone isn't enough to make someone a state actor, but I don't think that answers the question that Representative Bennett was trying to ask, which is, given that a private school, a private religious school, is providing education and is part of the state's overall role in the education system, and given that they now are eligible to receive lunch funding, is a private school a state actor if we pass your amendment?
Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Niska, I feel like Representative Greenman already did a really great job explaining why, and so I just want to draw us back to 2.5 that it does state what the state means, and so that is already identified in the underlying bill. And also, I think that you did a really great job in actually explaining how it works right now. Is that the courts do decide, and that won't change under this bill when it's passed. The courts will still continue to decide that particular situation. This doesn't change that, or it doesn't actually change that. So,
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I think I hope the people of Minnesota were listening carefully, because if I can translate what that means, the courts will decide is that we don't know. We don't know. We'll have to find out. We'll have to pass the bill to find out what's in it. And that's pretty concerning, because in the case that I'm talking about, Crown and Northwestern being told that they are state actors, that's still going on in court. Crown and Northwestern are still having to defend themselves against those claims that they are state actors in that case, because they are receiving state funds to participate in the PSEO program. And I think it's very important that Minnesotans also listen very carefully to the words that are being used by the majority in justifying this amendment. They keep talking about how case law might change in the future. Case law might change in the future. And the Minnesota Supreme Court, which is going to decide this case when it comes down in the future, is 100% appointed by Democratic governors right now. So there's a reason why the faith community is very concerned that the mask is off with this amendment, that this amendment is trying to force a worldview on private organizations, on private individuals potentially, maybe even homeschool families, and that the author of this of this bill is not willing to just accept this very simple clarification that would close the door on that argument. Just saying we have to depend on whatever the case law is that comes down the pike in the future. The case law is not as clear as they are saying. This language would make it clear. We should all support it. Vote yes.
Members, I want to take a few seconds to recognize former Representative Hunter Crantrail. He is here with us in the alcove. Further discussion. I recognize the author, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Speakers, and thank you, members, for the discussion. I think what is abundantly clear from the answers we've heard on the House floor from the majority in this discussing this amendment is that it is not clear. And especially, thank you, Representative Bennett, for asking those questions. I took notes. Representative Bennett asked about the school meals program and a few things like that. And the author said, and I'm quoting, "Receiving money is not enough to determine if someone is a state actor." So we just don't know. And that has been the consistent answer we got in Rules Committee. She's not saying, no, if you get state money, you are not a state actor. She's saying it's not enough to determine that you are a state actor, but you could be. And that is exactly why we need this clarified, members. There are so many nonprofits and different religious institutions, but also non-religious groups that receive state money that do so many things, provide meals, Meals on Wheels, athletics, childcare, nursing homes, hospitals, job training, food shelves. Members, all of these entities in our community who are not extensions of the state, but do receive state funding to do the mission or the work of the state, could be affected by this. And all I'm asking for is that we clearly state in a constitutional amendment that the state does not include private or non-state entities that receive public funds or participate in public programs or confer a public benefit. Members, this is such an important thing for all of us and for every single one of our districts. All of us have groups in our district that provide enormous benefits that also get state funding. And we need to reassure them and provide absolute clarity that they will not be sort of caught up in this amendment language, and that they will be free to continue to provide the important work they do in our communities, and that they can do it living out their identity in the public square as a religious institution or as a non-religious institution. The Lions, the JCs, there's a lot of groups that do things that receive state funding. And we need to ensure that they are allowed to continue to do that. And unless we provide this clarification, I'm very concerned that good work going on in all of our districts will not continue. And I just want to reiterate, members, the author said receiving state funding is not enough to determine if someone is a state actor. It doesn't say that clearly they are not a state actor, and that is the clarity we are seeking. Please vote green on this amendment.
There being no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll.
gone.
The chief clerk will call the names of the members who are voting remotely.
Carol. Carol.
Carol, no.
Carol, no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 60 ayes and 67 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. Representative Niska offers the following amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
Niska moves to amend Senate File Number 37, the unofficial engrossment. The amendment is coded A16.
I recognize the author, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Well, this amendment is really simple. It only takes out two words, but they're two very, very important and two potentially very distorting words to put in the state statutes. And the language are in the state constitution. And this was new language that was dropped in for the first time in the Rules Committee just a few weeks ago. It's my understanding from the way Representative Herr has talked about this that lots of people smarter in constitutional law have been talking about this for a while in closed meetings among left-wing activist groups. But there hasn't been a lot of discussion about this language. This language is on line 1.10, saying that the state shall not discriminate against any person in intent, so we understand what intent means, or effect on account of one or more of the following. So this is very concerning, and I think we'll kind of flush out some of the concerns about this, but first I was wondering if Representative Herr will yield for a question.
She will yield. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Herr, could you just start by giving us some information about the drafting history and where the word effect came from? Because it's not in the Senate version, and it wasn't in any legislative version of this prior to the amendment that you offered in the Rules Committee. So can you help us to understand where the words in intent or effect in particular come from?
Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Niska, so this language has been, we've been working on this since the session let out last year. And this language has been, we've been talking about an inclusive ERA language for many, many months now. And the language was made public at the beginning of May. And so it has been out there and it has been available for people to review and look over.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. If you were listening carefully, there's been a group working on an inclusive ERA since last interim. Of course, there hasn't been any public discussions about that until the Rules Committee hearing a couple of weeks ago, but there have been people working on it behind the scenes. Activist groups, presumably groups that want to bring lawsuits under this new Equal Rights Amendment. But I do have another question about that word effect, if Representative Herr will yield.
She will yield. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Herr, as the author of this amendment, what does it mean for the state to discriminate in effect, not as opposed to in intent, but in effect on account of one or more of the following? Is that including some sort of disparate impact type of a claim against the state?
Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Niska, and actually Representative Greenman has a really great explanation for this. So if you'd like to ask her to yield, she can answer that question for you.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Herr, I was hoping that as the author of the bill, that you might be able to answer that for us. But Representative Greenman, if she will yield.
She will yield. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Greenman, does the words in effect mean that we are incorporating disparate impact concerns into the Constitution?
Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Niska. Discrimination is discrimination, whether it's intended or in effect of the law. It's the way that our federal Constitution has been interpreted. It's the way that Article 1, Section 16, the religious provision in our Constitution has been interpreted, that you don't just have to prove that someone intended to violate or to discriminate, but you do have to prove that it has that effect, that someone has been discriminated against. This is long-standing constitutional principles around discrimination, and so I think it actually just makes sense and is really clear in the language.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Greenman, it's interesting that you would say that it's just a clear, long-standing principle about what discrimination means, but that we have to add the words in intent or effect, even though just a few minutes ago, your argument was exactly the opposite, that case law about state actor is clear and that we shouldn't then have clarifying language. It is actually also incorrect to say that in effect is the way that our current case law works. In fact, this is going to introduce, I fear, some pretty concerning disparate impact type of concepts into our law. And frankly, it's going to be divisive. It's going to be talking about all laws are going to be judged then by its effect on different groups of people. Everyone's going to be lumped into different groups, and we're going to have cases about what it means that a certain group is has some different or disparity or disparate impact in a particular claim. And so, Representative Herr, I do have some concerns about how this is going to play out. You said that that we're going to have to look at case law to see how things play out. So I do have some questions as the author of this amendment about certain types of potential effects of this provision, if she will yield.
She will yield. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Herr, in the amendment that you are offering and asking the people of Minnesota to vote on, if someone argues that the Minnesota state law that permits juveniles who commit violent crimes to be tried as an adult, if someone argues that has a disparate impact on any number of the groups or potential categories in the amendment, is that something that would be prohibited from the state from doing under the constitutional amendment that you have offered?
Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Niska, actually, I'm not here to answer hypothetical questions or scenarios. I don't know enough about the details of the scenario you're laying out in your own mind. It would be irresponsible for me to do so. So I'm here today to pass a bill that will allow Minnesotans to decide for themselves if our state constitution should reflect the values that all Minnesotans are equal.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I hope the people of Minnesota listen very closely and carefully to that answer, because what Representative Herr is telling you is that she wants you to pass something, and then later we'll find out what it means. Later we'll find out if juveniles can be tried as adults under the constitutional change that she is asking you to vote for. I do have another question, if Representative Herr will yield.
She will yield. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Herr, under the constitutional amendment that you are offering and asking Minnesotans to vote for, if the Minnesota state law that allows for parents to opt out of certain curriculum in their classrooms is challenged as being discriminatory in effect on account of any of the categories that are listed here, is that a law that would still be constitutional under the constitutional amendment that you are asking us to vote for?
Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Niska, again, it's a hypothetical situation. I think that that I just do not feel comfortable in answering because, again, it's a hypothetical situation. And so that's the best that I could help you with. If you want to have a discussion online and in every bill that we pass, that we want to go through every hypothetical, we should probably change the rules around here to do that. But right now, when we pass bills, we look at the issues that we're addressing, and we do our best to say, what is it that reflects Minnesotans' values in this bill? Is this language is what Minnesotans want?
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. And to the people of Minnesota, again, to translate, we don't know. They won't tell us whether their parents will still have the right to opt out from curriculum in their children's classrooms after passing the amendment. But they want you to vote for it They want you to vote for it. They want you to vote to add this to the Constitution, to override everything in Minnesota state statutes, including the parental right to opt out of certain curriculum. We just, this last week, clarified some religious exclusions in the Minnesota Human Rights Act. We don't know if that will survive. I'm sure I could ask Representative Herr, and she would say again that she won't tell you, she won't tell me, she won't tell anyone, but they want you to vote for it. They want you to vote to write this new provision into the Constitution that's going to overrule everything to the contrary in Minnesota state law. They want you to just pass the bill, and we'll find out what's in it. I do have another question for Representative Herr, if she will yield.
She will yield. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Hurst, there's a Minnesota state law prohibits the knowing transfer of a communicable disease, section 609.2241. I've heard arguments that that is potentially has a disparate impact on some of the groups listed in your amendment. Is that a state statute that would still be constitutional if we pass the constitutional amendment that you are asking the people of Minnesota to vote for?
Representative Herr.
Madam Speaker, Representative Niska, I am not familiar with that, and it would be irresponsible for me to answer a question that I do not have the background for, but I'd be more than willing to look it up, and we can have a discussion afterwards.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and members. Irresponsible. Irresponsible. Representative Herr, you're right. It is irresponsible. This constitutional amendment is irresponsible. We don't know what it means. We don't know what in the Minnesota statute books is going to be ruled unconstitutional by this constitutional amendment. We don't know if we'll be prohibited to, as a state, to say that only athletes who haven't gone through male puberty can participate in women's sports. We don't know. I'm sure if I asked Representative Herr, she would say it was irresponsible to answer that question. We don't know if the Extreme Risk Protection Order bill that was passed last year is constitutional. That probably has a disparate impact on certain groups, on certain characteristics. We don't know if legalization of cannabis that was passed last year is constitutional. I bet that has disparate health effects on different categories of people. We don't know if the charter school and open enrollment laws in Minnesota are constitutional. Right now, actually, Representative Greenman, the Cruz Guzman case says you're wrong about the current state of the case law in Minnesota. The reason that the charter school and open enrollment laws have survived up to this point is because there's no proof of intentional discrimination as it relates to the charter school and open enrollment laws. But if it's can't discriminate in effect, all bets are off. You know, frankly, if we pass this, there's not going to be a lot for us to do in this body. Right around the hall, the 7 members of the Minnesota Supreme Court appointed by Governor Dayton and Governor Walz, they're the ones who are going to dictate state policy in this state. Because anybody can go find any state law and any state statute book and say, well, in effect, this affects this group of people differently than other groups of people. Again, we're going to be putting Minnesotans in all these different buckets based on all of these different characteristics. We're going to divide up Minnesotans into all the different buckets, and all of state policy is going to be determined by its effect on this particular group or that particular group, and it's not going to be decided by us anymore. It's not going to be decided by us who are accountable to the voters in our district. It's not going to be up to the democratic process anymore. The people in our district can come to us and say, you know, that's a really bad state policy, and we're going to have to say, you know what? There was a trial in the Ramsey County District Court that found that there was a disparate impact, and then the Minnesota Supreme Court said we can't do that anymore. Of course, that assumes that we have an attorney general who even defends the state law in question. So I hope the people of Minnesota are paying attention, because what's being smuggled in under the guise of our shared values and equal rights is a complete takeover of every policy issue out of our hands in the hands of activist lawyers. You know, gender justice is right there on the name on the poster pushing this amendment. It's going to be groups like that that are going to find different reasons to say, well, this particular group is affected differently by this particular state law, and they're going to go to court. It's going to be great for lawyers. They're going to go to court. They're going to file lawsuits. They're going to have a trial in Ramsey County District Court. Every judge in the Ramsey County District Court is appointed by a Democrat governor. They're going to have a trial in the Ramsey County District Court about what the effect is on account of any of these certain groups, the groups that the Democrat Party chose to single out as special groups deserving special protection. And every single statute in the Minnesota statute books is up for grabs in those court challenges. And the people asking you, the people of Minnesota, the people asking you to vote for this, to give up your democratic authority, to give up your ability to hold your legislators accountable, they won't tell you what it means. They won't tell you what it means. Members, we have to take this word effect out of the Constitution, out of this constitutional amendment. It would be the ending representation amendment if we leave or effect in this. It would all policy would be run through the courts, all policy would be run through litigation. Nothing of significance would matter in the Minnesota legislature anymore. The people's House, the people's Senate would lose all of its power. It would all be done in the courts. This is a horrible idea. I urge your support for the A16 amendment.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Again, I rise to ask members to vote no on this for a few reasons, which I already started with. And, I enjoyed debating my colleague, Representative Niska. I'm going to look at you and not the cameras or not the, because what this is about is saying that in this constitutional amendment, we're going to make that look the same way as in Article 1, Section 16, which has been interpreted by the courts to include disparate, to include effects and allows disparate impact claims. That's the Minnesota Constitution, the portion that talks about religious freedom of conscience and religious liberty. The reality is, and for anyone listening out there or anybody listening in the body, all this says is that people should not have to face discrimination, whether you can prove it was intentional or whether you can prove that it has discriminatory effects. The most recent disparate impact case we saw in the U.S. Supreme Court was about religious freedom, was about religious liberty. The Groff case, which found that the post office couldn't fire someone because they couldn't work on a Sunday because of their religion. And the court found that there was a claim. They found that there was a disparate impact claim and let it go forward. So when we're talking about this is about religious freedom. This is about the civil rights that are being referred to in this constitutional amendment, the civil rights that the voters are going to go out and make a decision about. But at the end of the day, you can use all the fancy legal words you want. What this is about is discrimination is discrimination, and all this says is whether it's intended or it's at the actual effect. That is a violation. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Discussion. The member from Wright, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Discrimination is discrimination. Even if it's in effect, even if it manifests as disparate impact. Discrimination, a synonym for that would be choice. When one discriminates, they choose between this and not that. It requires an actor, it requires intention. This whole idea of disparate impact is a fallacious idea that is fundamentally flawed. There's a widely understood concept in statistics that correlation is not causation. But suddenly when we port that over into the legislative realm, any demonstrable correlation becomes proof in a court of law of causation, and the only possible cause is discrimination, regardless of intent, regardless of the choice by an actor. Representative Niska is absolutely correct. The inclusion of these two words, or effect, in the underlying amendment is going to break the jurisprudence of the state of Minnesota. Our state will not be able to function. Anyone, anywhere, who can point to any correlation, statistical correlation, will be able to bring the claim in a court of law that that is caused by discrimination. And regardless of the merits of the case, they're still going to have to fight it. They're still going to have to pay for lawyers. It's going to become disruptive. We see what the culture of litigation does to our economy, what it does to our institutions. Anybody who's worked for any employer has had some kind of encounter, some sort of coaching along the lines of, we better not do this. Not because it's wrong inherently, not because it's inherently discriminatory, but because we can't afford to defend the claim. This is going to put that on steroids, especially in the context where you guys just voted down one of the previous amendments that clarified what we mean by the state. You don't want to say that the state doesn't include private actors, that it doesn't include people who receive state funding. You want to leave that up to case law. Well, there's going to be a bunch more case law, tons more, if this gets ratified, because you're going to be exposing literally everyone to claims of discrimination based upon effect, based upon disparate impact, at the drop of a hat, limited only by their capacity to fund lawyers. This is deeply reckless and irresponsible. Just in terms of, take all of the moral arguments out of it. Just in terms of good governance, you are breaking the jurisprudence of the state of Minnesota. If this gets ratified, no one with any common sense whatsoever would ever choose to plant their shingle within these state lines. Why? Why would you do it? You can go literally anywhere else. There's 49 other options within the United States of America where you're not going to have to worry about some nebulous claim of disparate impact, where you're not going to have to worry about being discriminated against in effect, regardless of your intent. We're going to put this in our Constitution. That is like setting up a sign at the border that says, "Don't do business here." And that's exactly what's going to happen if you don't pass the Niska Amendment, and then this goes on to be ratified. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And when I hear disparate impact, correlation, I think of the generations that failed to get an education out of some of the school districts here in the metro, and that their decreased options in life, the disparate pay and opportunity because of the failure of that school district or school districts to actually teach them how to read, do math, etc. There's an easy correlation between disparate impact and that. Maybe that actually would cause some real fixes to be done. But you've got examples that you like to point to, but you seem to be ignoring some obvious ones. And if you don't take this amendment, don't take the advice, this ends up becoming part of the Constitution. It's pretty easy to show a very strong correlation of disparate impact and outcomes from the failure of some of the larger school districts. And frankly, I wish in other bills would be addressing that, but maybe the result of your work here will finally bring legal action so the kids can actually learn and have the same opportunities as the other kids that aren't discriminated against because of the disparate impact of that failed or those failed school districts.
I recognize the author, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Well, I think it's pretty telling what we didn't hear. What we didn't hear is any clarity about what the effect of this amendment's going to be. We don't know what Minnesota state laws that we now take for granted. We don't know which of them are going to be repealed or overturned by voting for this constitutional amendment if we don't get some clarity about this. Well, we did hear some misinformation and disinformation about Groff versus DeJoy. Groff versus DeJoy was a federal statutory case. It is about burdening an individual employee's religion. It's not about striking down statutes. So that's not really terribly illuminating to this conversation, where we're talking about a constitutional provision that says, here is what the state can no longer do, can no longer discriminate in effect on the basis of any of these things, and they won't tell us what that means. They won't tell us whether that means that your parental right to control the curriculum that your kids are taught in schools, whether that's still constitutional. There are activist groups who want to challenge that, who want to change that. You don't think they're going to bring, I mean, it's the same activist groups who are pushing this amendment. You don't think they're going to bring that claim? You don't think that the folks who are currently challenging the charter school law in Minnesota, saying that that in effect is the same as school desegregation or is affecting school desegregation, the folks who are challenging the open enrollment laws, you don't think they're going to try to bring that challenge under this new language? But we ask those questions, and the answer that we get, and the answer that you, the people of Minnesota, are getting is, we won't tell you. We won't tell you. Just vote for it. It sounds good. Vote for it. And then 2 years down the road, 4 years down the road, 6 years down the road, then we'll find out what it really means. Well, I'll tell you what it really means. It means that the legislature no longer makes policy. Policy in the state of Minnesota is going to be decided by the Ramsey County District Court. It's going to be decided by the Attorney General deciding which cases to defend. And it's going to be made by the Minnesota Supreme Court. I guess it makes sense why Democrats want this right now, because all of those organizations, right, all those entities right now are controlled by the Democrat Party. The so-called party of democracy, destroying democracy, asking you, the people of Minnesota, to give up your democracy. They're trying to trick you into giving up your democracy by voting for this thing that sounds good, but it's going to give all of the power to lawyers and judges. So, majority, you have a choice to make. Is that what you want to put before the people of Minnesota or not? And people of Minnesota, I hope you're watching. I hope you're taking notes about what the authors of this constitutional amendment, what they're asking you to do, and what they're telling you, and what they're not telling you. Members, please support the A16 amendment.
All those in favor of the motion say aye. Those opposed say no. The motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Dameth moves to amend Senate File Number 37, the unofficial engrossment. The amendment is coded DE5.
I recognize the author of the amendment, Representative Dameth.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And members, I have the perfect answer for you in this chamber. The DE5 is the language that is before you in this. It actually will guarantee equal protection under the law on the basis of sex, effectively the same language submitted to the states for ratification back in 1972. This is the answer for equal rights in Minnesota. The amendment is simple, it's to the point, it doesn't complicate the need, and it says equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the state or political subdivision of the state on account of sex. Almost 1 year ago, members, the House here in Minnesota passed HF 197, memorializing Congress to declare the Federal Equal Rights Amendment to be ratified and added to the United States Constitution as the 28th Amendment. If that language is good enough for the United States Constitution, it certainly is good enough for our state's Constitution. Equality is not a political stunt. We believe in equal rights under the law, and the underlying bill does not provide that. It would be unconscionable to enshrine favoritism and inequality in the Minnesota State Constitution. So that is exactly what the underlying bill does. But the DE5, members, guarantees equal rights for everyone on the basis of sex. It is the real equal rights amendment, and Madam Speaker, I would request a roll call.
Seeing 15 hands, there'll be roll call. Representative Dameth.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would request that you would vote green with me on the DE5.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Bonner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members. I want to say thank you, actually, for this amendment. I want to thank Leader Dameth for sharing her faith in the language that we passed out of this body in 1973 in support of the federal ERA. And I also want the opportunity to share with you why the proposed language of the current amendment builds on the original and takes it to the next level. I appreciate the nod to generations of women who pushed for equality, for freedom, and for autonomy. Indeed, we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, those who endured discrimination, disrespect, and disregard, whose voices were silenced, and some more than others, fighting for equality, freedom, and autonomy. Women who planted trees in whose shade they knew they may well never enjoy, but they persisted nonetheless. Throughout history, white, black, brown, and indigenous women stood shoulder to shoulder for generations because they understood that our fates are linked. That where discrimination flourishes, it impacts us all. Sexism, racism, discrimination based on who you are, inside and out, on who you love, or discrimination that overrides the right to control our own bodies, our own bodily freedoms. All forms of discrimination are not ranked, they are linked. To truly declare Minnesota a discrimination-free zone, we must root out discrimination in all forms. That is why the newest version very clearly states, out loud and in plain English, we value uplifting all people, and we believe the laws of the state of Minnesota should clearly state that the highest level of scrutiny should ensure equality, freedom, and autonomy in all its forms. This all-inclusive language clearly sets the stage to declare Minnesota a discrimination-free zone in which we honor the dignity of all people under the highest law of the land, the Minnesota State Constitution. And with that, while I appreciate the homage to those generations who fought this battle before us, I will respectfully ask members to oppose the DE amendment and vote red.
Discussion. I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Demuth, for this amendment. I was a little confused, though. It sounded to me like the last speech was a speech in favor of your previous amendment, the A19 amendment, which would have been the truly inclusive amendment, although I do think the DE5 is a good amendment. It clarifies that discrimination on the basis of sex is not something that we do allow. But I think it's very important that everyone, and maybe if you're on YouTube and watching the live stream, maybe scroll back a little bit and re-listen to the last speech we heard, which was about how what this body passed in the 1970s is obsolete. It's obsolete now. So instead of that one version, now we have this version with that picks out 9 different identities and says these are the ones that are important. In 2024, we've reached the pinnacle of human understanding, and now these are the ones that are important. Members, this amendment, the underlying amendment, is a fad. It's about 2024. It's about the folks who are in control of the Minnesota legislature in 2024, and what they decided was important. It's not going to stand the test of time. Frankly, the 1970s version has stood the test of time a lot better. The A19 would have stood the test of time. Unfortunately, the majority, who now supposedly is claiming to be for all-inclusive ERA, they voted that down in favor of this one that picks and chooses which groups of people are more equal than others. So I think the DE5 is a significant improvement over the underlying amendment, and I urge members to vote yes.
I recognize the author of the member from Chisago, Representative New Brindley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Demuth, for the amendment. And I am really excited to finally, after 8 years in this body, get to vote on this amendment, because we've never gotten to do that. It's interesting. When I think about the Equal Rights Amendment, and when we think about the fight for the Equal Rights Amendment for literally decades, since 1973, a year before my birth, we understand that we are talking about equal rights for women. And I so appreciated the speaker just a week or two ago referencing the fact that this very building did not have bathrooms for women. And I think about now, today, after, as Representative Bonner indicated, after the women who came before us, and standing on their shoulders, we have rights that our grandmothers could only have dreamed of, opportunities that our grandmothers could only have dreamed of. But we want to talk about Minnesota being, quote, a discrimination-free zone and rooted out in all its forms. And yet, in the underlying ERA, we only want to root it out for some people. Not for all people, only for some people. And in fact, we have purposefully excluded people who the legislature has deemed worthy of protection in the Human Rights Act, but for some reason, Democrats are deeming them unworthy of protection in our Constitution. Republicans believe in equal rights for all. Full stop. Full stop. And yet, I love the Demuth Amendment. Because frankly, this is is what our grandmothers fought for. This is what those suffragists fought for. The ERA that's being brought forth today is not what they fought for. They did not fight for women to be subjugated under a so-called equal rights amendment that's going to roll back Title IX for girls in sports, that's going to roll back the protections that we have fought for decades for women. I've talked about this before, but I spend a lot of my discretionary time on a board helping to train and encourage and empower women to engage in the civic process, whether as activists, leaders, as elected officials locally or here in the legislature or beyond. And it's because women are still woefully underrepresented in these spaces. Everyone knows that. It's not a surprise, it's not a secret. And so, while I would have preferred the A19 amendment, suggesting that the Minnesota Constitution be amended to say that all persons shall be guaranteed equal rights under the law, full stop. All people should be guaranteed equal rights under the law. I suppose since we can't do that, I would be pretty thrilled with the DE5 to honor our mothers and our grandmothers and those women whose shoulders we stand on. To continue to protect the rights of women. To ensure that our daughters enjoy the same rights that we have today. Because I have those rights, but I'm not so sure that my daughters are going to have those rights under this new equal rights, unequal rights amendment. But I will make sure that my daughters at least know that I stood on this House floor and I fought for them. My daughters will know that this ERA did not happen without a fight. That I tried my best to protect them. Thank you, Representative Demuth, for using the language in the original federal ERA amendment. This is the one that is the sort of gold standard that we work toward. And frankly, I wish that we had had an opportunity before the expiration to actually support this at the federal level. I'm afraid that ship has sailed. It would be lovely if it came back. It would be lovely if it came back, but we at least have that opportunity here today to do this for the state of Minnesota. We at least have this opportunity today to say to our daughters, to say to our granddaughters, that you deserve the same rights that I have enjoyed in this state. You deserve the same opportunities that I have enjoyed in this state. And I'm going to keep fighting for that.
The member from Wright, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Appropriation, that's the word that comes to mind. The ERA has been appropriated. It's been appropriated from our grandmas. It's been appropriated from the 1970s. And it's been transformed into something that it was never intended to be. And, I won't get ahead of ourselves and get into the debate we will eventually have on exactly how that plays out. But suffice it to say, this amendment, what you call the ERA, what you call the Equal Rights Amendment, has nothing whatsoever to do with our grandma's ERA. In fact, kind of does the opposite. We'll get into those details later. I mean, a lot of the rights that, as are outlined by Representative New Brindley, a lot of the equality that women currently enjoy in our society is going to be torpedoed by this thing if it gets ratified. And it's a really slimy way to go about it. Because you could have called it anything, right? You could have come up with your own branding, your own logo. But you wanted to appropriate the popularity of the ERA. You wanted to transfer the goodwill that's been built up over decades for this, the Dameth Amendment. You wanted to transfer the branding and the popularity for the actual ERA to this Frankenstein monster you've constructed that has nothing whatsoever to do with affecting, you want to talk about in effect, affecting equality for women. This vote right here, a roll call was requested, was it not? All right. This vote right here is going to tell us definitively how you feel about the actual ERA. Because this green vote is saying, I'm for that. I'm for my grandma's ERA. I'm for what that branding originally stood for. A red vote is going to declare very clearly that you're not. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Carver, Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I was waiting for this because I remember back last year in state government finance, it was in March, this came before the committee. And Representative Bonner was leading the charge on it, and I remember the conversation focused around something along the lines of, we need to do this, this is important, this is what we have to do, this is going to be what we need. Members, please vote yes. Let's get this out of committee. Let's get it to the floor, onto the Senate. There was no mention of it needing to be anything more than that. There was no laying the groundwork for, point 2, the next software release of this. And I'm just confused as to how we got here. I'm honestly very confused, because if that was what we heard in committee and that this was what was good enough, why do we have to have this again? And I want to point out that the House File 197 at least went to committee. And the file that we're working on today has only ever been heard by members of the Rules Committee. That's it. So this is the first time that any member of this chamber that was not on the Rules Committee has ever heard this in front of them. You might have talked about it, you might have thought about it, you might have written notes about it and email updates about it, but you've never had this in front of any other committee before. It was brought before the Rules Committee, and that's it. Just a small number of people on the Rules Committee, and normally we like to have things go through different committees, but you didn't do that. So last year, Representative Bonner told us, this is great, this is what we need to do. And there was emotional conversation in State Government Finance Committee about it. And then it was passed out of the committee and moved on to the next stop. But what we're dealing with today, Senate File 37, you just put in your stuff and brought it to the Rules Committee, and Good to go. So not only is the Dameth Amendment proper to revert it back to what you all gave your endorsement to, I mean, it says the list of authors is long because it has "and others" at the end of it, so a lot of you were in favor of it. So a lot of you had the opportunity to vet it, converse about it, but this one, the one we're dealing with now, it never went to any committee, and not that I'm surprised that more detailed process was not adhered to. 6 years in the minority has now taught me that apparently process does not matter. But on this one, we have the words of Representative Bonner in committee that I remember, that this was super important and we have to do House File 197, transmit it to Congress so that the important ERA amendment that you were authoring at the time, Representative Bonner, could be the thing that got passed and memorialized by Congress, and that we have to do this here, and we're going to send a strong voice as the Minnesota legislature to endorse this version. And then a matter of months pass, we come into calendar 24, and now we have this new and very, very different ERA. And it's a little demoralizing because you want to take at face value what you have heard previously. Like, oh, well, we've done this now. Great. So I'm really confused. And if it was good enough for last year, then I think that this amendment, the Dameth Amendment, the DE5, you've voted for it before. You can vote for it again. Thank you.
The member from Polk, Representative Keel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, wow, here we are at a conversation about Equal Rights Amendment. I'm old enough to remember in junior high when this was being discussed. When girls did not play sports competitively, that wasn't even a thought. There was some what was called GRA, girls' recreational activities, that would happen. Being a farm girl, I didn't do many sports. I don't think my father even liked sports, but whatever. I went to the games and played my clarinet and got out of the house anyway because he liked music. But, you know, I know that we look forward to things and improving life, but when I think back at the women fighting for Equal Rights Amendment, it's so different. That is not what, this is not what they were looking at. What they wanted was what Leader Dameth just brought forward. This amendment is exactly what they were looking for, to be treated better in their jobs, employment, to be treated equally, and just watching what happened was such a change. I remember the debates on abortion, because that was in '73. And, you know, in high school, you sort of pay attention, but don't entirely pay attention. And to be honest with you, I grew up in a household where equal rights were happening already. My mother and dad were farmers together, and they just worked as a team. And that's the environment I grew up in. So I had a little bit of a hard time understanding when women would say they weren't being treated. And of course, as you get older and you leave home, you learn that, oh, maybe not everybody is treated like they should be. But the point being is that this amendment says we will treat everybody all with equal rights. Leader Dameth's amendment is where we should be. Let's go back and support it. I can't believe that this conversation would tell young women that you can't Title IX is going to disappear. And it will, because it is creating a problem already for our young ladies and in competitive sports that are not, I find it interesting. You don't see many girls, do competitive sports with boys, other than I guess I've noticed wrestling a little bit. But otherwise, it really becomes a problem for our students. And I would hope you see that. Whether children are getting injured or there's all kinds of things going backwards. And I can't believe we would discuss getting rid of, we're not even talking about it. It will just happen. If we're going to do this kind of an equal rights amendment, which is a conversation for later, it's going to wipe out opportunity, especially for women. So let's vote green on Leader Demuth's amendment and support caring for especially women in this conversation. But in fact, everybody that is a citizen, that they get equal rights, they are treated as all, and we need to move forward to treat everyone better than the other amendment, or the bill will do, excuse me. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Douglas, Representative Franson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Members, if you visit the Minnesota Legislative Reference Library, there's an article, there's a link called Feminist Reforms in the 1970s. And it's all about the work that women did here in Minnesota. I wish I could have printed out the entire article, but it was many, many pages. Very interesting. But I'm going to read you a few highlights off of a couple of the pages here. The Minnesota House of Representatives became one of the, the Minnesota House of Representatives becoming one of an unprecedented 6 female legislators. She still serves here, among 43 women in a body of 134. Oh, hold on. No wonder why this is not making any sense. I think I'm on the wrong page. Hold on. Goodness gracious. Great balls of fire. Here's it. Now it makes more sense. Okay. The article, When Feminist Reforms in the 1970s. And starts off with, on September 19th, 1970, a group called Women Against Male Supremacy. They called the group WAMS, W-A-M-S, picketed a fashion show in downtown Minneapolis. The problem was not the fashions, but the failure of the show's sponsor, the Star Tribune Company, to desexagate its newspaper's classified job listings. WAMS had sought since January to persuade the company to comply with the State Act Against Discrimination and Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Guidelines set in 1968. Despite pickets at the paper's headquarters, costumes made of want ad stickers on newspapers, vending boxes, and a meeting with management, the ads still read, "Help wanted male, help wanted female." There's a button there that they wore. Women make policy, not coffee. Could you imagine? We don't have that problem here anymore. We're not walking around this chamber saying, we make policy, not the coffee buddies, do we? We don't have to do that anymore because of the people that came before us. An account of the protest in the Female Liberation newsletter includes this funny incident. A little girl wanted to know what we were doing, so we told her and then gave her a sign to carry. Her mother laughingly said, "Don't do it. Father will kill her." He's Star and Tribune columnist Jim Klobuchar. The author of the account, Phyllis Kahn, was elected 2 years later to the Minnesota House of Representatives, becoming one of the unprecedented 6 female legislators. Representative Phyllis Kahn, who a few of us served with, and I adore. In 2006, the little girl, Amy Klobuchar, became the first woman elected to the U.S. Senate from Minnesota. Neither feat would have been likely without the consciousness-raising organizations demonstrating and lobbying that made the 1970s, the words of the University of Minnesota's history professor, Sarah Evans, the golden years of the women's movements. Changes wrought in the decade opened virtually all arenas of civic life to women. Absolutely fascinating history of the work women did in the 1970s. So what kind of things did this legislature, did the Minnesota Capitol do for women? Also on the Minnesota Legislative Reference Library, there is a timeline. Minnesota Women's Legislative Timeline, significant legislation passed by the Minnesota legislature since suffrage, 1919 through 2020. 1919, the suffrage in Minnesota and the US, 1919 to 1920. 1921, women jurors. We didn't have women jurors here in Minnesota until 1921. Minnesota eliminated all gender qualifications from jury service. 1921, female deputy sheriffs. 1923, female candidates for office. This law allowed married women to use Mrs. and their husband's name when running for office if they chose so. Could you imagine? Could you imagine, Representative Rarick, if you had to ask Senator Rarick, may I please use your last name? 1923, protective labor laws. In 1923, the state of Minnesota enacted legislation designed to limit the number of hours women could engage in paid labor. 1931, desertion by father. Law regarding the desertion of a child or pregnant wife was strengthened to include the duly adjudged father of an illegitimate child or a father involved in divorce proceedings. 1941, common law marriage was eliminated. 1967, Department of Human Rights created. The Minnesota Department of Human Rights was created. It included a division to what? Assist women. The department succeeded the State Commission Against Discrimination. In 1969, discriminatory wage rates prohibited. The law creating the Department of Human Rights was amended to include protections against discriminatory wage rates based on gender in the workplace. 1969, alimony was created. 1973, Minnesota Human Rights Act. In 1973, Minnesota passed amendments to its human rights law to prohibit discrimination against women in employment, housing, public accommodations, public service, and education. In 1973, Equal Rights Amendment in Minnesota. In 1973, Minnesota passed amendments to its Minnesota ratified the proposed Equal Rights Amendment to the Constitution. 1974, no-fault divorce. 1974, also solicitation of prostitution. 1974, abortion. 1974, repeal of protective labor laws. Labor laws limiting the number of hours women could work at any job and in manual labor. 1975. Equal opportunity in athletics.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Representative Hollins, please state your point of order.
Mason's 101, debate must be confined to the question before the body. I'm not sure what this history lesson is about, but I do not feel like it's related to the amendment before us.
Representative Franson, if you can relate your comments to the amendment. Representative Franson.
I am talking about equal rights that women were given here in Minnesota. So equal opportunity in athletics. This law, known as the CON Act, provided for equal opportunity athletic teams and spelled out when single-sex teams are acceptable. 1975, the CON Act. 1976, establishing the Council on the Economic Status of Women. 1977, battered women, domestic violence. Minnesota became the first state to give financial support to battered women's shelters. 1977, the year I was born, aid to part-time students of higher education. This financial aid program helped women because women were more likely than men to be part-time college students. 1977, the Displaced Homemakers was passed. Job counseling and training centers were created to help and educate former homemakers who needed to enter the workforce. And in 1978, affirmative action. 1978 again, Open Appointments Act. One of the effects was to encourage more women to compete for and win appointments to state-funded commissions and councils and boards. 1979, the child care sliding fee was created.
Representative Long.
Madam Speaker, Representative Hollins and you asked that we confine the remarks to the amendment, and so far that has not happened. This has been an extremely long list of bills that are unrelated to the DE.
Representative Franson, could you explain how the history relates to the amendment before us? I think you might be getting there, but if you could connect it, that would be helpful. Representative Franson.
I am going over women's history. Thank you.
Representative Franson, can you explain how that relates to the DE5?
I am talking about equal rights for women. Is that not what we're talking about here today? Equal rights for women?
The question before the body is whether to vote in favor of or opposed to the DE5 amendment. Yep. So if you could just indicate whether your argument is in support of or opposed to and why, that would help.
So the amendment that we are voting on is the original ERA amendment, the one that women fought for here in Minnesota, including former Representative Phyllis Kahn. Thank you. In 1981, driver's license name. Married applicants were now able to use a family name prior to marriage as their middle name on a driver's license. I think you get the point. And if you scroll through and through, there are many years of legislation that has been passed in this body that benefits women. During my time here, in 2014, we passed the Women's Economic Security Act. The provisions were to help women and their families achieve economic security, including expansion of parental and sick leave, mechanisms to reduce the gender pay gap, measures to help victims of sexual violence maintain economic stability, grants to train women for high-wage jobs, and to encourage women entrepreneurs in traditionally male industries, protection from workplace discrimination for pregnant women, nursing mothers, parents, and a study of innovative retirement savings plans. And then in 2020, we passed the marriage by minors were prohibited. So members, women have paved the way here in this state. And as Representative Ann New said, it's because of them. Women have opportunity here in Minnesota. And so I support the A5 amendment because it gets to the point. It doesn't add a bunch of nonsense and water down everything that women have fought for. Or the DE5, sorry. Yes, the DE5. We do not need to erase women and replace women with men who believe they are a woman. We do not need to have abortion in our Constitution that allows a woman to abort her unborn child until the moment of birth. The language that voters may vote on in 2026, which is very interesting. That year is very interesting because if you're fighting for women or for all this stuff in your bill, gender and gender ideology, and why, if it's so important, why are you waiting until 2026 and not putting it on the ballot in 2024? I guess it's not that important until 2026. But the bill is gaslighting Minnesotans. It's tricking them. It's fooling them and makes a mockery out of women and the work that women have done for the state of Minnesota, to erase it, to replace it. So members, I ask that you vote for the DE5 amendment, and thank you, Representative Dameth, for the opportunity to do so.
The member from Meeker, Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. It's an interesting discussion, and appreciate the history given us by Representative Franzen. As a history teacher myself, I'm going to add just a little bit. In 1971, the majority leader of the Minnesota Senate was Senator Stanley Holmquist from Grove City, Minnesota. My senator, someone that I looked up to in my formative years. And I remember in the 1971, maybe 72, I was in the Holmquist lumberyard where the senator held fort. And I remember he gave me a whole stack of law books, statute books. And then he said to me, you know, there's one amendment that I've been working on. And he was leaving office in 72, but he said, this needs to be passed. And Senator Holmquist actually read to me the 1972 bill that had passed the U.S. Senate. Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Congress and the several states shall have power within their respective jurisdictions to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. So, quite simple. Basically, equality on account of sex. They didn't believe all the other categories were necessary, but that this would cover assuring that men and women had equal status. It came to a vote in 1973 in Minnesota, and it passed a very bipartisan way. I have the voting list here from the vote on the House floor, with Republican names like Flackney, Forsyth, Knickerbocker, Hagedorn, Hook, Lombardi. So I want to emphasize that that bill in 1973 passed to a wide margin, supported by both parties, because the provisions of the bill were very defined as to what it dealt with. Now, unfortunately, this was not ratified by the 38 states, and time expired. And I guess that's why it's been before us today, but it is not the same legislation that overwhelmingly passed this legislature in 1973. I urge support of the DE5 amendment.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Finke.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I also want to add to the history lesson that we are hearing about the original Equal Rights Amendment. I just think it's worth adding that that amendment came at great cost to many people. The most vociferous opposition to the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment was conservative and Christian women who were clear that the Equal Rights Amendment would destroy, quote, destroy the social fabric of America. That was what we were told in 1972, or they were told. And Representative Hudson said something earlier that I want to make sure we remember. He said, the original ERA stood the test of time, and it did. It did despite the fact that it was opposed by the entire, essentially in its origin, the entire conservative movement, despite the fact that it was very exclusive of black women, and they went and created, the black feminist movement went and created the Combahee River Collective in opposition to the ERA. When we have said all in this country, we have never meant all. So this amendment, please vote no on the DE5. Please recognize that this inclusive ERA will also stand the test of time because we are doing what is right.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Long.
Madam Speaker, I move that Senate File number 37 be laid on the table.
Representative Long moves that Senate File 37 be laid on the table. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The bill is laid on the table. Conference Committee reports on House files.
Conference Committee report on House File number 5237, an act relating to education. The report is addressed to the Honorable Melissa Hortman, Speaker of the House, the Honorable Bobby Joe Champion, President of the Senate. We, the undersigned conferees for House File number 5237, report we have agreed upon the items in dispute and recommend as follows. The report is signed by 4 of the 5 members on the part of the House and 4 of the 5 members on the part of the Senate. Joachim moves that the report of the Conference Committee on House File number 5237 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Conference Committee.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Joachim.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good evening, members. Before you is, or good afternoon, before you is the Education Conference Committee report. The bill reflects the hard work of our Education Conference Committee. I would like to thank our conferees here in the House, Vice Chair Clardy, Representative Kresha, Representative Edelson, Representative Sensormura. I'd also like to thank the Senate conferees, Chair Kunish, Representative Gustafson, Representative McQuaid, Swedinsky, and Bolden, or Senator, I should say. I would also like to thank nonpartisan staff from the House and Senate, the Revisor's Office and the committee pages, and of course, our incredible House CAs and CLAs and researchers, also those that we got to know very well in the Senate. It took a village to put this conference committee report together, and that village got bigger as we pulled in the children and families provisions that had been negotiated in the Health and Human Services bill. Chair Pinto is going to go over those provisions that you will see in Articles 12 and 20 through 22. I will go over the provisions in Articles 1 through 11 that have changed since the Education Finance Bill moved off the House floor. Members, in Article 1 through 11, you will see almost the entire House bill that left our floor with some additions from the Senate that made it even better. The one House provision that was not included in Conference Committee was Representative Hicks' provision that she brought forward to take a comprehensive look at special education and how our schools are meeting the needs of our students. But Representative Hicks and a few of our other members will continue that work with stakeholders over the interim. There are a few updates to the provisions that were in the House bill. The updated READ Act language reflects the final agreement reached with Representative Edelson and Senator McQuaid, and more importantly, with all the education stakeholders and literacy groups. This includes sending about $31 million in teacher training stipends and a formula directly to school districts. This is the same approach we took with the $35 million we pulled forward from last year's curriculum funds that are now going directly to school districts. In a formula with both formulas with more flexibility on how school districts can spend that money. And members, there are runs on your desk, or will be on your desk, showing you each what your districts will get. You just have to add the two columns together. And these funds will go out without districts having to apply for them, which makes it even easier. Our paid student teaching pilot program funding was reduced a bit, lowering the average stipend amount to roughly just shy of $7,000 per student teacher. And we were able to add the prep teacher program at Augsburg College, increasing to the total of 8 campuses that will reach just shy of 50% of our student teachers. We shifted funds to increase the student attendance pilot program from $3.34 million to $4.687 million in one-time funding available for 3 years, and we added Rochester, Cook County, and Sauk Rapids Rice school districts. That brings our total to 12 school districts and just under $90,000 students statewide. This data should really be healthy and wealthy, with 10% of our student population being represented. The funds also provided increased administration funding for MDE for data analysis around attendance. The grant funding for Promise Fellows and Minnesota Youth Council is still in there, but it was just shaved a bit. P-TECH actually did a little bit better with the grant funding modified, so their appropriation does not phase out entirely. There were technical amendments from MTE to the paraprofessional qualification language, as well as technical changes to MDE and DHS medical assistant third-party billing. MDE also suggested some technical amendments to the House OIG Office of Inspector General provisions, and I made sure Representative West knows that the Inspector General now has all the tools he needs to do his job. And Senate statewide health standards had some technical provisions. There was a stakeholder agreement to bring in modifying language, ensuring hourly school workers are paid on all unscheduled school closures to account for unique circumstances in fee-based school age care programs. But that's with money districts are already being paid and would retain if those people were working or not. There were a few Senate-only provisions that were included in the conference committee report. $1 million one-time funding to aspiring teachers of color scholarship program, which was also a House bill. $250,000 in one-time funding to the St. Cloud School District for an EMS facility suitable for coursework in EMS for high school students. That was also a House provision bill. $150,000 for a teacher paraprofessional compensation working group. $130,000 in one-time funding for a state school librarian, which the ongoing funding will come from the library aid that we had last year. $64,000 for a task force to look at permanent school funds. There is $40,000 in one-time funding from a Representative Newton bill, equivalent to funding school districts and charter schools to tribal schools. We recaptured $840,000 of unused funding from a 2024 appropriation that was in the tax bill. And the Senate had pulled over the education-related provisions in the public finance bill that the House carried in the House tax bill. So we all saw that in taxes. There were a few no-cost provisions that came into conference committee that were brought to our attention, agreed upon by both the House and the Senate and MDE. In last year's bill on the Indigenous Education for All language, there was a needs assessment that was done to see what the tribal leaders needed to help develop supplemental material. And we're just asking MDE to do an additional needs assessment. There were technical amendments from MDE to transfer some computer science, to do some computer science language changes, and then also to transfer some money. That was one of our bills. There was a repeal from an obsolete report that had been in the state government bill. And then members, there's also language in the state government bill that I know we all talked about when the education policy bill came off the floor. There had been concerns about school districts that lost their local paper and how much it would cost them to send out letters to everybody through the mail. And we had carved out those four school districts or 5 in the education policy bill. Well, we added some language that came from the state government bill, and this provision allows the school district, when their newspaper of record closes, that they can publish their proceedings on their school district website until about August 1st, 2026. Gives us time to really look at it. And then we also added in there that They must also send those, the notices that they have to publish to their local public libraries. In case people don't have access to the web, they'll be posted at the public library. So in closing, members, what you have before you is the entire House bill that passed off the House floor, minus one provision, a few monetary adjustments, and some minor technical corrections. This bill has also been enhanced by a handful of provisions that came over from our Senate colleagues. And with that, members, I will turn it over to Chair Pinto to go over the additions that came from the Children and Families Committee.
The member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So members, you'll recall a couple weeks ago, we passed House File 2476, which was the Children and Families Budget and Policy Bill. The Senate did not pass the companion to that bill. Senate's going to Senate. They sent their provisions over in a different way, and so this is why the provisions are coming back in this conference committee, because there wasn't a way to have it come back, unfortunately, by the bill. The good news, however, members, is that as good a bill has left the House chamber, it's even better coming back. So you'll recall that the bill that we sent over improved our child protection system, addressed food insecurity and homelessness, strengthened our child care and early learning system, and got our next new state agency, Department of Children, Youth, and Families, the strong foundation it's going to need. We were enhanced in every one of those areas. The bill now contains the Minnesota Indian Family Preservation Act, sort of step 2 on that, authored by Representative Becker-Finn, a provision to prohibit discrimination against parents with disabilities from Representative Hicks, a provision to require an out-of-home placement plan when a child is being placed out of their home. We want to make sure that parents know what their rights are from Representative Hassan. And some money adjustments, a little bit less on homelessness, but a little bit more for food banks. There's some grants for child care facilities, making sure that, that our family child care providers and child care centers have what they need to meet licensing requirements and be strengthened there. That's a program that's very successful for a couple years. We're going to be able to continue it. And then a number of policies advanced by our state agencies that were not in the bill as they left, but had received affirmative positive votes in committee, and were able to take those back. Members, that I think basically describes it. I will say that we had a very good bill, as I say, that left. It's even better coming back, and I'm so pleased that in doing that, we're able to have a broader approach of getting young people off to a great start and making sure that families and everybody in our state receives the support that they need to be successful, to receive the shelter, to receive the food, and to be in a place to thrive, because that benefits every one of us. So I think you're going to be very pleased by the bill, by the conference report. Look forward to its approval. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Discussion. The member from Pine, Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. And to Chair Pinto and Chair Joachim, I just want to thank you for the introduction to this bill. And I want to thank you for, overall, there's been a fairly transparent operation to this committee report. Some of them, or the committees, conference committee, not all of them have been run this smoothly. And I do want to thank you for that. And as has been brought up, there's a provision in this bill that, had left under health, and, the Senate did not have similar language or not in the same area. And, this is, come into the education bill now. And, unfortunately, we didn't, we really don't feel like we had a whole lot of a voice. The health committee didn't meet, and it wasn't there, and it ended up not being there. In the end, it ended up being, the children and families portion ended up being put into this education bill. And it was the last conference committee meeting. There were several of these new proposals were put in. They were adopted. It was the children and families portion of that. And so now here we are today. I thank Chair Pinto. You were gracious and went through kind of a high overview with myself and a couple others of bringing those in, and thank you for that. And while it would have been nice to have an individual on the conference committee, I know that doesn't always work out. And I do appreciate the open conversation that we've had, and I've really grown to appreciate the Children and Families Committee. It was something that when I was first assigned to it, it wasn't one that I was asked to be on, but I've grown to and enjoy that. And I've worked quite a lot on the SSIS, and really trying to get that updated. There is some increased funding in this for that, and I thank you for working on that. And in the recent days, we've been shown also that, the transparency is really important. And, we've expanded this education bill quite a lot. And while I think many of the provisions are good in it, I would make a motion to not adopt the conference report, and I ask for a roll call.
Representative Nelson moves to refuse to adopt the conference committee report, requests a roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. On the motion to refuse to adopt, Representative Nelson.
I thank you for that, and I ask for a green vote.
Discussion on the motion to refuse to adopt. Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll. Will the clerk please call the name of the member who's voting remotely?
Carroll.
Carroll, no.
Carroll, no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 58 ayes and 69 nays, the motion does not prevail. We are on the motion to concur. Any further discussion in the adoption? I'm sorry, I keep saying motion to concur when it's actually the motion to adopt the conference committee report. The member from Sherburne, Representative Lawrence.
Madam Chair, good afternoon. Madam Speaker, good afternoon. Members, I've shared many times, about 23 days in, but I feel real honored today because although these two committees got to combine a lot of the results, I got to sit on both of them. And so what a neat experience for me to be able to learn on both sides, not only education and finance, but also children and families. And I feel very, very grateful to have that opportunity. And although I just got an insight because I think total I got to attend 5 conference committees. So it wasn't a lot, but it gave me a little bit of insight on the workings of how our committees operate, the process that they go through, and the information, the challenges that we have, as well as the testimony that we got to hear. So thank you for that opportunity, and I'm grateful that I was assigned to both committees and now I'll be able to stand here and speak on behalf of the body and address some of the things that I see and that I observe. And I shared this in our Educational and Finance Committee when I had a chance to speak on one of the subjects. And I'm just going to share a couple things that I know. And I think most everyone in this room is going to agree with the first part of my comments, maybe not all the comments, but maybe the first part of it. But this is one thing that I do know. I know that we've got great teachers. And in education and finance, teachers are talked about a lot. A lot come in to testify, but we've got great teachers in the state of Minnesota. We had superintendents come. We got some excellent superintendents that manage our school districts and take care of our school districts out there. We have dedicated school board members. And I mean that seriously. We've got school board members that are concerned about their districts. They're intentional when they're dealing with their finances, with their setting policies for their districts, when they're dealing with concerns from parents and residents in their district. We have some extremely dedicated school board members in the state of Minnesota. And then we've got committed parents. And I speak on behalf of parents today, especially because they have families, which is part of the bill that we get to discuss today. They got children that they're raising. They're involved in a community, and they get to be involved in the educational system. And they're committed to not only striving for the best of their children that are learning, that are part of the educational system, but in doing so, they commit to the whole process as well. And the benefit of not only their children, but children's friends. They commit by attending sporting events, sponsoring, helping out with different activities that are going on. Some get a chance to volunteer in classrooms as well. And so to understand that we've got great teachers, we've got excellent superintendents, we've got dedicated school board members, and we have committed parents, all dedicated to the betterment of our children in our state, in our educational system as well. Couple things that I can speak from experience and from my district as well is that local involvement are extremely important. And that's why I mentioned those 4 groups of people, because they are on the local level. They're the ones that deal with the repercussions of what happens here in St. Paul, the decisions we make, the financing that we provide, the policy that we set, that they have to implement, deal with, figure out how to make it work. Those 4 individuals, those 4 groups of people. But there's no question that I heard more than once, and even from my own district I speak, is local control is essential. Mandates, and I'm not going to put a number on it, and many numbers have been talked about the number of mandates that were passed or have been passed, but mandates in and of themselves, although they might have a good fundamental goal or direction, they remove local innovation. And that's one thing that concerns me, is mandates take away the innovation of those 4 groups of people who know the students, who know the community, who know the educational system that's working within their school walls, within their area. In addition to that, and this I think we all hear a lot about, and I know was brought in testimony, is unfunded mandates hurt our educational system. And I don't think there's one district in here that we represent that wouldn't agree with that, is the unfunded mandates are a challenge to our educational system. It stresses the budgets. They have to rebudget, figure out where the money's going to come from. Many times it results in cutting local programs and possibly staff, which do not benefit our students.
Representative Lawrence, if you can relate your comments to the adoption of the conference committee report. Representative Lawrence.
I will. Madam Speaker, thank you. Thank you. So I needed to preface so you knew where I was coming from. In the conference report, although there's a lot of dollars that are talked about in that conference report, and even some dollars do go directly to our district, and they wind up going direct, and it was testified directly to the district, I believe it falls short. As far as the conference committee, I think it really falls short. A lot of those dollars wind up in creating some new government I'm going to say bureaucracies, or different government programs that the money does not get down there. It winds up in a lot of nonprofits, which as a new member, I found surprising, is that the number of nonprofits that receive direct dollars, that it doesn't get to the individuals, doesn't get to our school districts, doesn't get to the parents, doesn't get to the teachers, doesn't get to the school board members, doesn't get to the superintendents, and is used for good. And so it's one of those things that our schools need to have that funding. And so as you look at these bills, as we look at some of the things that was married together within the children and families and into the educational finance bills, I think it does fall short on those factors. Is one, the money getting down to the local control, where there's innovation, where there's people that are dedicated on that level, as well as the mandates that are challenging them to try to implement on the time level. And so I am not going to vote in favor of of adopting it as is. I'm grateful for the experience I had over the last few days to be a part of those 2 committees, and I look forward to continue to be a partner and able to serve. But at this point in time, I would encourage a no vote as far as we move ahead. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Freeborn, Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And again, I said this before when this bill came up before, but thank you for the work on it. Appreciate it, working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. And just like when I spoke earlier this week on the education policy bill, same thing goes. There are good elements in this bill, but I would like to ask members to vote against moving this forward, send it back to committee, and if I could say so,